Hello everybody, and welcome to this stream. I don't know what it's about. I don't know what it's about really, but the one thing I can say for sure is that it's a stream. Have I done all the media correctly? Is this leftist audio? Can you hear me? Habibi reached 200k. Legend. Yeah. That's how I want you to address me from now on. Hello, everybody. I do a good job of making leftist economics fun. Well, thank you very much. As much as it can be. As much as it can be. Yeah, it's quite hard to make economics fun, isn't it, really? Like your average economics content or lecture or book isn't really that fun. I suppose you got like Freakonomics and shit, but like they're fun in what I consider a really annoying way, and maybe that's just me being like, I don't know, just sort of preferring my own way of doing things, right? What's the word for that? Chauvinistic? No. Preferring my own way of doing things. Don't know. Arrogant? But yeah, I don't know. Freakonomics and stuff, I don't find them that fun. Like, I find them more annoying than fun. It is a lot of fun if you present it right. I guess what I'm saying is that very few people do that. This subscriber count doesn't go through a boom-bust cycle. It goes up faster and it goes up slower, but it always goes up. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Like, people have stopped, even back when I started YouTube, which is not that long ago in terms of, well, in terms of how many videos I've released. When I started YouTube in 2020, people were still doing kind of 50k celebration video, like as in on the main channel, and just people don't really do that anymore. Although I did see that Angela Collier did one recently, the physicist, for 150k. But it's just like, subscribers I don't think are as big a deal as they used to be. Yeah. Just like, I guess it's more about the algorithm, and there's like more channels, right? So you're more likely to, 5 years ago, if you were subscribed to a channel, you may well keep track of all its content, but now even if you're subscribed, I'm subscribed to like 100 channels, and it's like, okay, you still have to compete for my attention even within my subscribers. Subscriptees? They're getting subscribed to? I don't know. The subscriber economy in shambles. 200k is only worth like 10k in 2008 subs. It's true. It's true. Subscriberflation. It's the inflation that they're not telling you about. You want to know where all the money that the Fed printed went? It went into YouTube subscriber counts. Congrats on 200k unlearners. Yep, you are the unlearners, my subscribers. That's what I call you. Not often in public, but sometimes in my head. Any thoughts on the Yet channel, Economics Explained? Don't know what Yet means, but it's a channel. The thing I can say about Economics Explained, for sure, is I can definitely say that it's a channel on YouTube. It's one of the channels on YouTube. It's one of the economics channels on YouTube. In fact, I can narrow it down. That is what I can say for sure. Oh, the YT channel, yes, of course. Can we please not bring up... Are you a Marxist? Can we please not bring up Marxism? Now, that's the dialectic, everyone. That's the dialectic in action. It's the dialectic that goes across my mind frequently whenever I have to talk about Marxism. You know, it's funny, there is an FAQ for UE. There's not actually a there's not a question... I don't actually think I've been asked, am I a Marxist? Or maybe I have. Not enough times to put it on there. I see it as a very complicated question, right? Because, and I don't want to sound cheesy. I don't want to sound like cheesy or non-committal. But in one sense, like, unless you're like a sort of vulgar mainstream type economist, like in one sense, we are all Marxists, right? Like, so I consider my economics, which loosely aligns with like the post-Keynesian tradition, as also as equally Marxist as post-Keynesian, right? I think it's heavily influenced, and you've got someone like Kolechki who's like half Keynes, half Marx. So in that sense, it's very influenced by Marxism. I mean, I was just reading The Origins of Capitalism by Ellen Meskins Wood, which is a Marxist historical text, and there's few scholarly groups that you would go to for there are a few better scholarly groups that you would go to for a history of capitalism. You want to go to the Marxists for it. Does that make me a Marxist in the sense that some people seem to consider it a religion or a cult, where you have to like reference Marx every 10 seconds and you're still stuck in debates that have been going around in circles for 100 years? No, of course not. We've moved on, but we are still in Marx's shadow, just as we are still in Keynes' shadow. You know, Marx was an astonishingly great thinker, but so were other people, right? So we don't have to be religious about it. A jumping dinosaur. That's just the default. Most YouTubers and streamers have like their custom subscriber thing. Famously, I'm a technophobe and I cannot be bothered to do that. So yeah. I don't know what it would be. I'd say the logo, but like that's already been overused. I mean, look, it's all around me, you know. Thoughts on Yanis Varoufakis? Any thoughts on game developers unionizing? Oh, well, I mean, there's only one type of union that I don't support, and I'll give you one guess as to what it is. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's definitely something that, like, if I'm sick of these really super deep, slightly more abstract, general videos on economics, which I do get occasionally, right? So, for instance, the planned obsolescence video was a bit more tangible, right? It's like planned obsolescence is something that happens. That felt different to my other videos, which have maybe been a bit more abstract. The Uber one, if you've watched it, maybe fits into that category as well. But there is a lot of stuff coming out about the video games industry and how I'm pretty sure it's bigger than the film and TV and music industries combined. I might have garbled that fact. That might not be right, but it's bigger than it's much bigger than you think. And the other thing about it is that, like, although people mostly focus on the massive corporations like Blizzard, Activision, and to a lesser extent, I guess, FromSoft and EA, right? People focus on the big ones like that. It's mostly just really precarious. Like, it's mostly really small studios making like games that you've never heard of. It's really precarious kind of freelance employment. So it's like this massively profitable industry that's quite precarious for a lot of its workers with high pressure deadlines. And people haven't really taken it seriously. I think partly because video games are like for children, you know what I mean, in a lot of people's heads. So once you take it seriously, you're like, fucking hell, this is an absolute behemoth. I like the surge pricing video. Sad it's kind of underperformed. Yeah, that, honestly, I really like that video, and it's a really interesting one because views don't track quantity, and I would use that as my views do track quantity of views by definition. They don't track quality. And like that surge pricing video, when I made it, like I was quite happy with it. It was really well focused and designed. And then my editor, while he was editing it, was like, oh, this one's really good, isn't it? And then like loads of people contacted me after it came out. They were like, oh, I really love that one. All the comments are like, oh, I really like this video. It's really, and then like just half as many views as my usual videos. Maybe because it's shorter. I don't know. The union of marriage is what you don't support, right? No. Maybe. Yeah, The most comparable industry to video games is the trucking one, where you have this weird blend of megacorp and freelancers with cutthroat competition at the expense of workers. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Yeah. God, the trucking industry is fucked, isn't it? What is that? I think I said this in the Soul video, but it's like 94% of truckers quit within a year. 94% quit within a year. It's so precarious, man. And you've got like the port truckers who work at the port. You've got the truckers who are more internal geographically to the, especially to the USA. But obviously there's trucks in every country, and it's just such a precarious industry that literally just depends on exploitation of workers. What misperceptions does the public have of mainstream economics? Any interest in debunking those? Yeah, interesting. You know, I just saw something. I mean, it's stupid, right? I just saw something that's like stupid, but right, let me show it to you, because someone just posted. I don't have Twitter anymore, but somebody posted this on my Discord, and I was just like, man, this is so stupid. Right. Lex Friedman, what is the fundamental problem with the way economists reduce the world down to a model? Is it too simple? Or is it just even the first principles of constructing the model is wrong? Oh, thank you very much, B. Stoker. Michael Saylor, don't know who this is. I think that the fundamental problem is, if you see the world as a scalar, you simply pick the one number which supports whatever you want to do, and you ignore the universe of other consequences from your behavior. Now, obviously, this makes absolutely no sense at all and has nothing to do with what economists think. Lex Friedman's question isn't that bad, right? Do we get too caught up in our overly simplified models of the world? Yes, of course we do. Mainstream economists and neoclassical economists especially, but everyone does it. You see the world as scalar. Like, what does that mean? A quantity without direction, because that's how I interpret scalar. It's like a mechanical term. It doesn't mean anything in the context of economics, at least not obviously. You pick the one number which supports whatever you want to do. Now, why does that follow from seeing the world as scalar? Imagine if you saw the world as a vector. Surely you could still pick the one vector that supports whatever you want to do, and you ignore the universe of other consequences from your behavior. So, I mean, is this like self-help? Are we talking about your own behavior, or are we talking about like economic models? Like, I literally, I mean, this is just fucking nonsense. So, also the one number, I mean, is he talking about like GDP or something? I guess that's maybe I can make sense of that. If you see the world as GDP, you pick that, and then you ignore the other consequences. But like, I don't know if you would necessarily consider that a scalar. Look, I'm trying to be charitable. I'm trying to make sense of it. Obviously, this is just word salad, right? So, I mean, that's just the type of thing that you see out there about mainstream economics. And I think for me, who has a channel called Unlearning Economics, and who had like an old blog which was much more into debunking economics and stuff, I think when I started seeing more of this stuff, and as I started doing a PhD and stuff and learning a bit more, I was suddenly, I think at one point I was just like, fuck, I've had enough of these ridiculous critiques of economics, right? Like this is just pseudo-intellectualism. It doesn't make any sense. Like, what the fuck are we talking about? Don't try to read sense into nonsense. Sean Dyson, my biggest flaw, I think, is attempting to read sense into nonsense. He may mean GDP, yeah. If you use models, you have a strong incentive to pick numbers that support it and ignore the wider picture. But I think just say that, right? What's this whole scalar thing that he's blabbering on about? And he talks about the consequences of your behavior. I don't know if that's about... Is he definitely talking about GDP? It's so stupid. Is that what I said? As a massive Thomas Sowell fan, you did an amazing job with your video. I still think his perspective is very valuable. Well, what can I say? Thank you very much. I'm glad that you watched it and you liked it enough to subscribe. Look, you know, let me just make that jumping dinosaur a little bit smaller so it's just jumping on my massive forehead. Let's just make that, position that right here. Okay. What was I going to say? Look, you know, Sowell's book, while I think it's basically completely wrong, and I really don't like the way he uses sources, it's good to have something that comprehensive to put forward the libertarian point of view in a way that's more focused on consequences than the kind of anti-coercion type libertarianism. He doesn't get mixed up with that. He just says capitalism is the best system because it produces the best outcomes. He's not interested in defending billionaires as kind of people, you know what I mean? So I found that kind of valuable. It clarified my thinking as well. Sailor is saying that even if the economy scales up, but the behavior to make it scale up can be bad. I don't know, man. I mean, I think you're being very charitable, right? But you're reaching. This is a different definition of the word scalar, right? Because scalar means quantity without a direction, as far as I'm aware. And you're using it to mean scale? Who is he, anyway? Who is he? Who is this dude? Michael Saylor. I don't think they are talking about GDP, you know, in context. One second. Let's do it again. I don't think they are talking about GDP. Gauge theory. In general, I don't know if you've heard of like Eric Weinstein has been talking about this with gauge theory. So different types of approaches from the physics world, from the mathematical world, to extend past this scalar view of economics. So gauge theory is one way that comes from physics. Do you find that way of exploring economics interesting? Much more computationally intensive and richer thoughts of mathematics. Jay Forrester. This is okay. We've created models of economic behavior. They're all multi-dimensional, non-linear models. Yeah, I mean, he's going for the like complexity angle, right? But I really... Economic models, right? Economic models have like feedback, and they have multiple dimensions. Like economic models can have like n dimensions. So I don't know if he's just thinking of like the basic model, right? The most simple model. But anyway, I'm not going to read the whole transcript. Apologies if that paragraph didn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't think it was very good. I mean, this is the other thing, right, Muffety Tuffety, good name. It is like, I was just thinking, like, if you think economics has been beguiled by maths, like, I don't know if just dropping in, like, more maths, more complex maths is necessarily the way forward. Like, I don't know, it just, if there's this mechanical issue... Right. I mean, like you can drop in these buzzwords, non-linear, dynamic, complexity. Some of it may be useful and surely is, in fact. But people have tried to use this type of modeling in economics, and you can't actually use... Pardon me, sorry. You actually can't use like the kind of non-linear chaos theory weather type stuff, like the Wrens and stuff like that. You can't use that in economics because it doesn't have the properties of that type of system. Mathematically, it just doesn't, right? So from what I remember, it's something like the a property of, everyone knows that weather forecasts, they get less accurate as you go further out, right? Predicting the weather this afternoon is relatively easy. Predicting the weather tomorrow, we can do a fairly good job these days, right? But in a week, it becomes much harder. In a month, we don't know really. In a year, forget about it, right? And that's one property, right? It's accurate. If you've got an observation at time t, these models are accurate at time t plus 1, right? And weather has that property. Other physical, chaotic, complex but physical systems have that property. But economies don't. You can't predict, like, what you want to, on September 14th, 2008, you can't, which is just before Lehman Brothers collapsed, by the way. You can't predict the behavior of the system past that point. So that very basic property of those chaotic systems just doesn't hold in the economy. And then you just like, are these people actually looking at this kind of stuff, or are they just beguiled by fancy mathematics, and they just, fetishizing mathematics in a different way, and assuming that because they've dropped all these buzzwords in, it somehow has value, just because it's like better mathematics. Anyway, that's just my American entrepreneur and business executive. He is the executive chairman and co-founder of MicroStrategy, a company that provides business intelligence, mobile software, and cloud-based services. Bitcoin grifter, yeah. Hello. Yeah, welcome everybody that's new. My grad school mates have fallen down the MMT rabbit hole. How do I bring them back to the light of orthodoxy? You're asking the wrong person. I think I'm an MMTer, to be fair, if anything, but I'm just not in rhetoric. Yeah, most of my differences with MMT are kind of differences of strategy and emphasis rather than substantive differences. But maybe Connor can bring you back out of the light of orthodoxy. MMT. Oh, God. It's a rabbit hole. It's a bit like making a video on Marxism. It's just like, it doesn't really matter what you say. People are just going to get angry and pedantic about like whatever you about whatever you say, unless it's completely glowing. Well, even if it is completely glowing, people will still do it. But yeah, at some point. Like, I get that, Czar. I get, like, the point about economic models, but my point really was that Lex's question was sufficient, right? And then he just started, when you see everything as scalar, scalar? I mean, sorry to do this, right? Sorry to Google definitions. A quantity such as a mass, length, or speed that is completely specified by its magnitude and has no direction. A number, numerical quantity, or element in a field. I mean, is he just saying if it's mathematical? A device that yields an output equal to the input multiplied by a constant, as in linear amplifier. Because you can't interpret him as saying, oh, it's just a number or numerical quantity or element in a field, because that also applies to the systems dynamics stuff. So I really don't know what point he's making with the scalar word. I just think it's buzzwords. I'm sorry. And that is the Lex Friedman experience, right? And a lot of these, like Dan Huberman as well, in a completely different context, right? And it's not that they're always misusing them, but it's very thick with these buzzwords. And I'm just like, fucking hell, man, explain what you mean in plain English. English. What did I just say? I think I mixed English and language together. Ingwage. It's a new word. Speaking of buzzwords, that's my new buzzword. My MMT comment was mostly in jest. Oh, right, okay. Yeah, sorry, I didn't get that. Vic3 Enjoyer, by the way. Good name. No, it's interesting, isn't it? The MMT orthodoxy debate, because sometimes I'm just like, obviously you've got like the Chicago guys, the austerity guys, right? They're everybody's enemy. Let's put them over here, right? Let's put them over here. We don't like them, of course. But then when you've got like the kind of fairly progressive Keynesian mainstream economists and the quite progressive kind of MMTers, I'm sort of like, if you guys sat down in a room together and designed policy, I don't even know if you'd have any like substantive disagreements about how to go and how it works. You know what I mean? You'd all agree on expanding fiscal stimulus, government spending, investing in certain things, infrastructure, green energy, blah, blah, blah. I think you'd all agree that for a lot of rich countries, especially, that can be financed by, seigniorage, by printing money in, to put it simply. And then I'm just like, I can't be asked to have these like aggressive debates where everybody's calling each other idiots. Crypto. Oh God, I mean, I'm not a fan of crypto. I can't say I'm an expert on it, but it just, in terms of, it's not a currency, right? I mean, they call it a currency, but it's so volatile. How can, that's the thing about currency. It's a store of value, right? You need it tomorrow or even next year. You need it to be worth as much as it is, at least. To have it fluctuating that much up and down just makes it so difficult to use as an actual currency. So I don't see it as a currency. And it kind of, it concerns me. It's been a while since I looked into this, but its relationship to sort of money laundering and organized crime and perhaps increasingly or in the future corrupt states, right? That really concerns me, as does its environmental impact. I think he uses Scalar to concisely communicate that he's a douche. Yeah. Yeah. If you want to go down this rabbit hole, there's almost an orthodoxy and heterodoxy within MMT. You can be fringe in the fringe. It's wild. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. My favourite theory is that post-Keynesian... So people who now call themselves post-Keynesians versus people who call them MMTs, they're actually just US and UK post-Keynesians. Kind of that learner, maybe sort of Caldor divide. Gary Stevenson. I play football with Gary. I know him quite well. I haven't read his book yet, The Trading Game. It's done really well though. But I've interviewed him. If you check my live channel, Unlearning Economics Live, I did interview Gary, and that's kind of how we met. And then I invited him to play football with me, and I see him fairly regularly. Bourdieu. Jeez, man. That's well out of my wheelhouse, I'm sorry to inform you. The materialist economy of symbolic goods. I mean, I don't have anything to say about that that's not just boring or hackneyed. I've never heard of Lex Friedman, but my feed showed a video of him interviewing Sean Carroll, a physicist, and Lex struck me very strongly of someone who knows the words, but has never had sex. Is that what you're going to say? Sorry. Oh, God. At least I make myself laugh. But doesn't know what they actually mean. Oh, you did finish it. Lex is just Rogan on Zans and a higher education. Honestly, he's such a suck-up as well, isn't he? I'm sorry. Look, Lex, if you want to invite me on your show, platform me. And I don't really have anything against him as an individual, but, like, it's just him sucking up to people with, like, wealth, power, and influence, right? Digital Feudalism by Varoufakis. I haven't read his new book. I've watched an interview with him. Yeah, it's a funny one. I don't disagree in a sense. I really don't disagree, but in another sense, I'm like, why call it techno-feudalism? Like, stop confusing the matter. I don't know. Is the MMT divide something like the Judean People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea? Sometimes, yeah. Thanks, Hatzer. Thomas Sowell is to you what Milton Friedman is to UNFTR podcast. Do you know them? No. 1 second. Let me have a tiny little look. Unfucking the Republic. No. Interesting. I'll have to take a look at them. Predatory pricing debate. John McGee argued that companies never did it and that it would be irrational if they did. Since then, there's been a back and forth on the question. That strikes me as... it's an empirical question, right? To foreclose the possibility because it would be irrational that's like econ brain at its worst, right? That's literally like the joke about there can't be $10 lying on the street because if there were, somebody would have picked it up. Therefore, I won't pick up the $10 that I see. Clearly, if competition is inhibited, or if there are kind of behavioral tricks you can use to exploit consumers as well, clearly, in that case, then predatory pricing can happen. Dan Evans, no. Have I done any reading on NGDP targeting? Yeah, I used to be a bit of a critic of NGDP targeting, and I kind of still am. Partly because I just don't think that the central bank can effectively stabilize nominal income growth at 5%. Like that. That's almost to like... they do think that they've solved the business cycle essentially, right? And I don't... Yeah, it's like... We have quite a lot of proof that central banks struggle more in a downturn to stimulate the economy than they do to crash it in an upturn. But that doesn't mean I'm completely against some of their suggestions or some of their logic. Lex pisses me off. People shouldn't interview others about topics where people in the field have serious disagreements if you know nothing about it and refuse to challenge the interviewee. Yeah, even within economics, I'm quite reluctant to go outside of an area that I know about. I feel like it's quite dangerous. And that you should always have a challenge, even if it's a bit of a softball challenge because you're not equipped, but just like push them a little bit, right? Do your research, show that there's a bit of disagreement. Yeah. Interviewing is tricky. One of the problems, right? And I say this as somebody who interviews people. I do it within my field. I do it on subjects that I think I'm informed enough on, but interviewing is a skill, and one of the perhaps unspoken issues with new media is that a lot of people, they're not trained as interviewers, right? And you can be an expert on something and still be a bad interviewer. People tend to think that it all sort of comes together, and you got like Joe Rogan, who's like, I don't know, a lot of people like him because he's got a kind of chilled vibe, and I don't know, he's a bit of a bro, right? It's a bit of a stoner podcast, but he's not an interviewer. When you watch an actually good interviewer, like a journalist, and I don't like defending journalists, but like Mehdi Hassan is a good example, right? Jeremy Paxman was like the canonical example in the UK. You watch somebody actually trained in interviewing, Andrew Neil, right? You watch them compared to like a podcast host, and it's just clear that they know what they're doing. And so we shouldn't, new media kind of allows this unregulated type of interviewer in, which is quite dangerous. Hello there, civil engineer here. Thanks for presenting info so well and making it reasonably easy to digest for someone in another field. Appreciate that your scruples. You're welcome. My granddad is a civil engineer. Well, he's retired now. I almost went down that route, but then I realized that instead of building things that work, I instead wanted to go into economics. Thank you, Taser. What do I, specifically as a very left-leaning economist, think about rational choice theory? My background is behavioral economics. which I think in a lot of ways it was kind of my entry point into a critique of mainstream economics, because the rational model is completely implausible. And it's funny because I think that people are reasonable and they make okay decisions, but that those decisions are rules of thumb, heuristics that are adapted to a particular context and sometimes, or maybe even often, misfire. And also, this alludes to what I said to about predatory pricing, right? They can be exploited by companies that want to maximize profit, or by other nefarious actors, maybe politicians or whatever, right? So you've got these rules of thumb that underperform, that perform quite well, under kind of normal contexts, but then in some contexts they really don't work, and that's also when people are vulnerable to being exploited, because we don't do all the calculations, right? And I know there are different ways of interpreting the rational choice model, but some of them are sometimes it's just a tautology, right? Where you're like, whatever people do, they're rational because they wanted to do it, blah, blah, blah. It's like the weird Austrian way, which I don't really like. But yeah. So there's like, one of my favorite examples is the gaze heuristic. So human beings and dogs both do this. If someone throws a ball, right? Now, what's the rational thing to do when someone throws a ball? Right, up in the air, it curves, right? And maybe from your high school mathematics class that the ball follows roughly a parabola, right? It's a minus x squared plus some other term for friction or whatever. Now, the rational thing to do would be to calculate that, right? And then go and stand where the ball's going to land. And that would be, if you could do that, that would be very quick. You just have to go there. You don't even have to look at it. Just get yourself there in a straight line from where you are to where the ball's going to land. Stand with your hand out, boom. But of course, that we don't do that. We can't do that. So what you actually do is the gaze heuristic is when you look at the ball, right, and you keep your head at a fixed angle, and you run and you slow down or speed up so that you're always at that angle, right? And you gradually kind of converge with the ball, and you hit where the ball hits the ground at the same time that it does, right? And so you arrive at exactly the same time as the ball. Think about it, right? That's what people in baseball do, right? Dogs do it with frisbees. We do it with balls or frisbees as well, right? And that's what we do. It's called the gaze heuristic, and it leads to some like weird behaviors. So if you throw a ball directly up in the air, right, you use the gaze heuristic. Now, what happens is, think about this and you'll realize it's true. You back away and then go back to where you were standing. Now, that's irrational, right? That's stupid. Why would you do? You could have just stood still. If you throw a ball directly up in the air, you back away and then you come back to keep the gaze angle fixed. So it's kind of like these rules which work really well, and they're really parsimonious. They require low computational effort. You don't have to calculate where the ball's going to be, but there are situations where it leads to some kind of wacky behavior. So that's basically my view. The gaze heuristic is my view of human behavior. Very reasonable, parsimonious, interesting rules, which just sometimes misfire. Of course, I've missed out the whole kind of cultural context and stuff. I know there's a lot to say about that, but I like the gaze heuristic. Is this part of the gaze agenda? Yeah, the gay heuristic. Yeah, yeah. It's all of behavioral economics is just the gay agenda repackaged. You know what? Really concerns me about reality is that I bet somebody has kind of made that argument at some point. Has made something analogous to that argument, right? People who say we're not rational, they're just trying to impose woke on us or something. Even if humans were perfectly rational, it would be impossible for any person to get full information about their options. Yeah. So another favorite example of mine is that the number of options for like baskets of goods you could buy in your average supermarket. Pardon me, sorry. The number of combinations exceeds the number of atoms in the known universe. And I think it was Seppold that... Seppold? Someone... Richard Seppold? Sorry, I've forgotten who it was, but he calculated that. Bonus part of the gaze heuristic is how, prior to learning about it, we had a whole theory about women being worse at catching balls and therefore having worse computational capabilities. Yeah. Oh my God, I didn't know that. That's of course. Because if you can somehow use some kind of theory to be sexist, then, you know, why not do it? It's always worth it. I've been thinking about housing again recently. As a pure steel man, have you seen good work economically for pro-rent controls? I mean, I've been not pro, but also not anti-rent controls. I think it depends on the context, right? It depends on the specific city, the specifics of the policy, whether it's likely to work or have overall beneficial effects. I mean, Josh Mason has written about rent controls. There was also this guy... I think his name on Twitter was William B. Thorne, but I don't know if he's still on Twitter, and I don't know if that was his real name, but he was writing his entire PhD thesis about rent control and the opposition to rent control. Yeah. But there are a few things. If you just search something like economists are wrong about rent control, like, I don't know, then you'll probably find some stuff. I mean, one of the things that I really think is really important when you look at rent control is there's this idea that it reduces the construction of new buildings, and that is based on like the simplistic Econ 101 take. It doesn't. Like, it just empirically it doesn't. Second generation rent controls, at least, which are designed not to do that. They don't do that. And there may be some problems with them, right? But again, it depends on the specifics, and it depends on things like tenants' rights and, you know. Clip. Yeah. I mean, like, build more housing for sure, right? Like, I think we can all agree on that. You know, rent control, let's say it has a neutral effect on the total housing supply. There's still not enough housing, so that would be my first policy. This is why I'm like ambivalent about rent control, because although I think a lot of people are quite wrong about it and exaggerate its negative effects, public housing is just like my first choice. Like, clearly. What do you think of housing as a public good? I mean, yeah, the snap, right? I think so. I think, I like the Scandinavian approach where there's a house available for anyone who wants one. Now, that doesn't mean it's completely free, but it does mean it's below market rates. Rent control's a bit of a band-aid. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, high rents, I think, are a sign that the market is not structured properly, right? So you can have things like more public housing, more private housing, better zoning rules. You can have land value tax, obviously. Georges, what up? And yeah, that kind of stuff is like what I would want to do first. And then in some situations, maybe with those policies, or maybe if you can't get those policies, maybe you think about rent controls, I'm Scandinavian, that is not the case here. Actually, I just made a very embarrassing error because I was thinking of Finland, which is not Scandinavian. I was thinking of Finland, sorry. Nordic is what I meant. But yeah, I mean, obviously they're all different. Countries, right, aren't they? And they all have their own approach. But yeah, they do, generally speaking, I'd say, compared to like my country, there's much more social housing. France as well. France has been really good on. So it's not. I don't think it's like directly state-built housing, but it's like a requirement for the private sector building housing that it needs to build a certain amount of low-income housing. Stiglitz on the euro. No, I don't think so. But I mean, I can imagine what he'd say. I've read, obviously, a few things by Stiglitz. Normie. Yeah, the euro and the EU from an economic aspect in general. I mean, the euro was a terrible idea, right? So there's that famous paper on optimal currency areas by, is it Mundell or Fleming? I can't remember, but it's like a 60s paper. And I remember somebody doing an exercise where they like randomly selected countries from across the globe, and they were like more matched than the European countries. I mean, just look at the Eurozone crisis, right? It was those countries, yeah, political union, the EU. The EU's a political project. There are economic aspects to it, like the single market and free internal immigration, which I'm generally in favor of. But the euro, the same currency, like in like Greece and like Germany, they're so different. It's just ridiculous, right? So I think that was a mistake. I mean, I think it was done for political reasons. But I mean, there's that whole thing of kind of Europe falling behind the USA since 2008. And I think that's just because of worse policy, which is partly to do with the euro. I mean, in the UK, we don't have the euro, but we still pursued austerity because we have a horrible, vicious ruling class, and we hate the idea that things could ever get better. But like, yeah, I think the euro's a political project, and it really shouldn't have been implemented. Whether you'd abolish it from having implemented it is another question entirely. I mean, maybe not. But yeah, I do think it was basically a terrible idea. And I don't know of any type of economist, whether they're like a mainstream neoclassical person or like a Marxist or an MMTer, I don't know of anybody who's like, yeah, the euro was a good idea. The goal was to force fiscal union by introducing that currency. Yeah, I mean, I guess that happened a little bit, but not enough, right? Banning meat. I mean, I used to be a vegan. I'm still a vegetarian. I gave up on it after like 7 years. I realized it was like actually causing me quite a lot of social anxiety, and also definitely had health effects. Now that I've gone back to vegetarianism, it's like, yeah. I still cook vegan quite often, but it's just that flexibility, unfortunately. But yeah, in terms of banning meat, I mean, it's like banning cars, right? Or banning anything. It's an end goal. You want to ban that. You can only ban things when you have the social force will behind it. If you just banned meat tomorrow as a government diktat, it just wouldn't work, right? Like, people wouldn't do it. People would rebel politically. You need change. And even banning meat, again, like banning cars, I mean, is it a complete ban? Probably not. Do I agree or disagree with the bargaining theory of price? I mean, what, that prices are set by bargaining in some way? For sure, it's true, right? I mean, even demand and supply is sort of about bargaining power, right? Because it's like about options. If people can choose something else, right, then that affects their demand. Or if labourers can choose another job, that affects their supply of labour. So there's a bargaining element to prices. But I mean, in terms of the bargaining theory of price, you'd have to be more specific. Ban disposable vapes. I mean, that's something we are moving towards. How would I respond to the popular narrative which frames the solution to housing as deregulating zoning laws? Personally, I'd rather re-regulate, and I don't understand why some progressives champion deregulation there. Well, I think that it's deregulation doesn't have to be a dirty word, right? Like, for example, I advocate deregulating drug use. and sex work. So for me, I think a lot of zoning laws, especially in the USA and the Anglo countries more broadly, they do have a very racist history, right? You've got like white flight, redlining, and I don't think you should. I mean, American suburbs are just, they're a fucking nightmare, right? Like just car centric. You have to drive 10 minutes to get milk. Like that makes no sense to anyone in Europe. And you can talk about Europe as a whole there as one place, because we literally can almost always walk down the road unless you live in the middle of nowhere. But like in American cities, you have to drive to get anything. That single use zoning, that kind of suburban family, I think it has very patriarchal, very racist roots, very car-centric, capitalist roots, even if you like, based on the male breadwinner. So I'm not in favor of that. But I mean, it's not going to solve the problem by itself. I think from what I've seen, again, it really depends on the specifics, right? Building more housing in the private sector does tend to reduce rents in the rest of the market, and I'm not against it. I do advocate it. The idea is that there's this kind of almost trickle down, right, cascading effect. You build housing, and even if it's like luxury housing, then, you know, people who are relatively well off move into it, and that frees up their houses, and then people who are slightly less well off move into those, and there's this cascading effect. But I don't think the effects are like massive. I feel like you need quite a big increase in building to reduce rents. Happy to be corrected if that's empirically not true, but that's just what I've seen from looking into that literature. So the effects exist, but they're relatively small, and I just don't think it's going to do what direct social housing built by the state or required by the state it is going to do. But yeah, still deregulating, you know, the ridiculous single-use stuff. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me as a city slicker. I just always lived in cities, and, you know, somewhat in suburbs sometimes, but not that cut off. Always with shops nearby and other things nearby, parks, and, you know. But I just consider that type of lifestyle, it just seems disgusting to me. Thank you, Dead Micah. Dead Micah, is that a reference to Red Dead Redemption? Because that's a good name. If so, I just finished that game. That's also assuming rich people aren't coming from abroad to move in. Yeah, there's that. Yeah, there's definitely the international investor angle. I mean, in London, that's a huge problem, right? There's no single thing for me that will solve housing, right? It's like you've got to think about credit as well. I mentioned before, right? Like land value tax, zoning, public housing, rent controls, credit. You've got to think about mortgages, how much we rely on credit and how that inflates. I think house prices, it inflated the housing bubble. There's also the fact that we seem to be using our houses, especially in the Anglo world, as like pensions, because we don't have good pension systems. It's so, and like imagine campaigning on the promise of house prices declining. Like we all want affordable housing, and yet house prices declining would be the most self-destructive political goal that you could come up with. Nobody wants that. So it's like, what do you actually, you know what I mean? It's so complicated. It's literally like the housing crisis is the everything crisis. Thoughts on Taleb? I don't know. I mean, he's obviously got some interesting ideas, but he's a bit of a character, isn't he? Thoughts on worker co-ops? Herbert Gintis seems to have disproved their validity. Has he? Where? With like a modelling exercise? I've got a whole video on worker democracy. I mean, it seems to work. Seems to work pretty well. it was quite difficult to find evidence that it doesn't work, as in like survival rates, productivity, worker pay. There are some complex effects on worker pay. It's like more volatile, goes down in downturns, but they retain employment. Herbert Gintis? I don't know what you're talking about. I can't find this. If all my subs donate $1, I could live in a 400 square foot studio apartment in New York. That's true, actually. Germany is subsidizing poor families by paying part of or all of the rent. That's a huge problem, since then some landlords can just raise rent since the gov is always paying for it. Yeah, that is that's the demand side subsidies, right, which I don't think are a good idea at all. A wage ceiling. Yeah, I mean, I got, maybe it's just my inner economist speaking. I can't, just like high marginal tax rates, abolishing the privileges that a lot of richer people have. For instance, intellectual property being quite a big one. Changes to corporate law to favour workers, right? I think like all of those things, I just sort of want to push those to reduce. I want to change the institutions that generate the wealth. A wage ceiling, I'm not sure if it would work. It feels like it would have to be international, or perhaps at an industry level. I mean, you can imagine like the Premier League implementing a wage ceiling, right? That I could imagine football associations doing that. That might work, but in general, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure. There'd just be so many ways around it. You just see some weird behaviours. Rich people would be screwing us over some other way. And that's not to disagree with the aim. Like I said, there are lots of ways of doing it. But I guess I like pre-distribution more than just like fiating. I guess you could call it pre-distribution, but you're sort of allowing everything to happen, and then you're just by fiat implementing the ceiling, which I'm not a massive fan of. It seems a bit blunt. It's quite a blunt tool. It's not dealing with what's generating the wealth. Oh, thanks, Chess with Ivan. You're well to the right of me on lots of stuff. Painful Eastern European experience. Holistic solutions instead of policy wonkery. Yeah, just, I don't know, like, if you really fucking address intellectual property, a lot of the major billionaires would be fucked. I'm telling you. Not to mention that most CEOs are getting the bulk of their compensation in ways other than wages. We need to rethink unrecognized capital gains. Exactly. Tax capital gains the same as income to start, right? Like, I don't know. Could another 2008 style recession happen in the future, or has the global economy adjusted to resist such major busts? Has finance become regulated properly since? Of course it could happen. I think one thing it taught us is never to deny that such an event can happen again. And now it might not be a housing bubble, it might not be exactly the same, but something similar could happen. I mean, I always worry about the tech sector. I'm always like, didn't we just have a tech bubble? Isn't this just another one? Right? Like, is everyone forgotten? And I know the tech bubble, when it burst, it didn't lead to a recession like 2008, but that's a possibility. Finance, it is better regulated than it was pre-crisis. That is true. But I think one of the things about the financial sector is it kind of always evolves new ways of crashing and generates new ways of becoming unstable, right? And sometimes those can be quite hidden until it comes to the fore. It was pretty cool to hear a Ben Felix voiceover in one of your videos. Oh, yeah. God, that was the value video, wasn't it, when I asked him to? A couple of people refused to do voiceovers in the Thomas Sowell video. In a nice way, but just because it's too controversial. What to do about the anti-intellectual strain of some online leftists? Just ignore them. I think for the most part, you've got to ignore people like that, yeah. They're not... Although they are very aggressive on like Twitter and in the subreddits that they've got, they're not... The left as a whole is not a big force in the real world, let alone those like absolutely wild people, right? And yeah, it's important not to get caught up in them because that's what content does to people. I think like when you've got a lot of screaming content and it's like, it's kind of the, not the straw man, right? But it's the weak man. It's just like stupid people shouting at other stupid people, you know. Did I see the Beyond GDP essay contest for young economists? Get a chance to read any? If so, what did you think? Hopeful for youngsters. I did see it. I didn't get a chance to read any. I'm currently like in the final stages of my own book, so I'm not doing any sort of holistic impromptu reading, but were they good? I mean, tell me. I'm sure that some of these, yeah, the youngsters, the future lies with the youngsters. I'm sure some of them are very good. How do we talk about economics and the like to our pretty disinterested peers? How do I intro this to my Gen Z brothers? Yeah, I don't know. Super fun UE YouTube videos. I mean, Gary Stevenson, who was mentioned earlier, I think he's pretty good for that, to be honest with you. I think he's like quite chatty and people kind of get him who aren't. Hey, Ben Felix, you're slightly different. You're a different Ben Felix? I think so. I would personally argue that many of the new financial regulations missed the point. They were aimed at some of the problems and not others. It seems pretty vulnerable at the moment. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, yeah, I don't want to overclaim. I haven't really looked into it enough. Price shocks and inflation. Yeah, the difference between them. It's a good question, isn't it? Because people use inflation to mean cost of living crisis, and that's reasonable because we measure both through like the CPI, right, the consumer price index. But it's like you can have inflation without a cost of living crisis. In fact, like a healthy low amount of inflation, like let's say 5%. Imagine if everybody's wages are going up by 5% as well as prices. Then there's no cost of living crisis, right? And debts, nominal debts are falling. So that's like, yeah, there's kind of a nuance in how they're covered. And clearly what happened in 2022-23 was a supply shock. It was a bullwhip effect, right? As like the supply chains adjusted and there were loads of excess orders. Then people over-ordered because they didn't have enough, and it led to this cascading effect. But eventually it sort of was solved, right? I mean, policy helped for sure, but the passage of time helped more. It's even in the UK where we've completely fucked things up in terms of like bad policies, Brexit, whatever else, just generally being shit. The inflation has come down quite a bit. How often do I pay money for goods or services to a business poorer than me? Yeah, I don't know. My hairdresser? Or around a similar level, let's say. Not many people are poorer than me, by the way, since I went full time. I will say that. Every econ person enjoys getting to actually people on the definition of inflation. It's a rite of passage, yeah, true. One other thing I noticed, though, as well with the general public is that the term recession is also used in a similar way, right? So when the cost of living crisis was going on, people were saying it was a recession. And it's like GDP growth has been really stagnant in the UK. We called it the cosy lives in the UK. So when the cosy lives was at its height, there was really low GDP growth, but it wasn't quite a recession. People were calling it a recession. Oh, thanks, Bismuth. I do not know Nick Hanua. Capital Theory disproves worker cooperatives after he and Bowles studied them for 10 years. He says they can't finance themselves. God, I mean, it's a big claim, right? But isn't that just contradicted by the existence of them? Like, persistently. The persistent existence of worker co-ops. How do I feel about banning non-compete? I'm quite a big fan of the ban on non-competes. I think they're extremely restrictive. And workers are generally at a disadvantage in the employee-employer relationship, right? I feel like they should be allowed to sort of go where they want and say what they want. You think they should only be legal in exchange for employee stock ownership plans? Well, I mean, it's a suggestion. Yeah, I think. I mean, it's if I give you something, you give me, right? I think that's fair. If I'm required to act like I'm loyal to the company, then I need a stake in it. Surely you can just create new ways of financing cooperatives. Capitalist corporation also required a complete overhaul of financing systems. I mean, it's really interesting because I was just reading an article, I think on HBR, by some researchers into worker cooperatives about how one of the barriers to financing them has been that they're just not that prevalent and people don't really know what they are. And that's something that I think a lot of economists, they might underestimate that, social awareness, right, of something can be really important. So people are just like, oh, well, if worker co-ops were so good, then they would have risen to the top in the market. And it's like, no, because people don't know about them.
I've been doing Google surveys, so take some of their money.
Thank you. I'm always happy to take Google's money, Paul. Thanks for the donation. I support banning non-compete clauses because I support pro-market policies, not necessarily pro-business policies. Yeah, I mean, I respect that position, right? It's like, not enough people take that position. They just reflexively support what's pro-business when there's actually a difference between them. A big difference, actually, because markets aren't always pro-business, and in the long term, they generally aren't pro any individual business. This is a bit of a dumb question, but a few months ago, I read about some big economist I like that. I like the slang economist, who it turns out was impugnation data in a hugely incorrect manner to support their papers. Anyone remembers this? I'm not sure impugnation is the right word, right? But you're talking about fraudulent data, falsifying data. You might be thinking of Dan Ariely, who is actually a psychologist by training, but he kind of straddles the line between the two disciplines. But because I'm from behavioral economics, I know of his work pretty well and his books and stuff. And there was this because he wrote a paper about dishonesty, and then it turned out that the data had been faked, which was obviously poetic, but then it turned out there were like loads of other ones as well. It's really worrying, but I don't know if that's who you I don't know if that's who you mean, but Vorsh made jokes about the US banning the channel non-compete. I remember that beef. Oh, beefs. Is an economics degree still respected and compensated well? My friend got a grad job at PwC, but pay was shockingly poor. I'd say they are respected and paid well. I mean, sometimes when sometimes when you start, you just have a shockingly poor pay packet, and it depends where the degree was from, what mark they got, right? But I would say, I think economics degrees are one of the better ones in terms of compensation, and especially for the difficulty of them. Because it might be that like some highly specialized industry, engineering or computer science degree does better in terms of pay, but it's actually going to be substantially harder. It was Dan. Okay. PwC pays terribly in general, even in comp sci and maths. Yeah, fair enough. If two vegans have a real problem with each other, is it still considered a beef? Yes. But fake beef. Everything about workers' co-ops is a win work to benefit each other, not shareholders. I mean, you can have shareholders in a worker co-op as well. This is the thing, right? They just don't necessarily have voting rights. And that separation of like ownership and control is quite natural in a way. It's not why. So say you invest in a company and you get money back, right? You grant a loan. A bank might do that. That's a normal loan. So the shareholders might be Class B shareholders, it's called, and they only get money back. They don't necessarily get a vote. Like, I don't understand the problem with that conceptually. See you, George. I'm considering studying an MSc in Economics and Policy of Energy and Climate Change, but with not having a background in economics and not studying it since school, I'm not sure it's a good idea. It's really hard for me to answer that without looking at the specifics, but I will say the specifics of your course. But I will say, like, yeah, it could be quite tricky if you haven't done maths, especially. You might find, with like, there'll be like an econometrics course and there might be like core, macro and micro, and they could be quite mathematically intensive. And I mean, my master's, having done 3 years in economics, I remember my master's being pretty difficult. I am kind of tempted to. I saw a video on my subreddit the other day that was like it was like an anti-UE video. Somebody posted it and it looked really bad, but I'm sort of tempted to react to it, at least for as long as I can stand it. Depends though. Depends how bad it is. I might just lose the will to live. Libraries of education material that can help to spread important understandings of economics. Any suggestions for things I would put in such a library? I don't know. I mean, that's such a big question, right? Isn't it? I mean, no offense, but shouldn't you have an idea of what to put in it before you make it, like a reason for making it? Perhaps if you write down your purpose for making it, then you might, because like there's a lot of educational resources out there, right? But do you have like something very specific in mind? Because I've got like the ultimate economics document, which is just like along these lines, and I'm not saying that's definitive, but it is like, you know what I mean? Like, what's the deal with yours? What's the point? Wolfgang Streak. I don't really know that much about him except some of the articles I've read. Talking to my daughter Varoufakis is good. The movie The Big Short. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good introduction to economics, I think. As good as any, really. Hi, Alejandro from the UK. Yeah, Varoufakis is talking to my daughter is good. Mea culpa, caveat emptor for the history, but yeah. But I think there's an interesting talk between him and David Wengrow of David Wengrow of The Dawn of Everything, sorry. David Graeber's co-author. There's an interesting talk between the two of them. And where Varoufakis is kind of like, yeah, look, my history is kind of crude, you know, like most economists. The course has no specific requirements for having studied economics or maths, and a lot of it is about energy systems and policy, but yeah, I'm fine enough at maths, but don't particularly enjoy it. Oh, okay. No, well, in that case, I'll go for it, to be honest. Howdy, Texas Evan. Saxtirical, one of my Discord mods, NG Spy, who was here earlier, I don't know if he's still here, he actually tried to get him, he went to an event with Yanis and tried to get him, but Yanis refused. He said he's doing too many podcasts. Yeah, exactly. The Big Short's great for what it is, right? We need more stuff like that. I grew up in a housing cooperative in Bangladesh. It made me hate my neighbours a lot because it was ruled by consensus, so good decisions would be blocked by one guy. I'm not a massive fan of consensus decision making for that reason. I actually prefer majority. Maybe at 300k, yeah. We'll see. I like Yanis Varoufakis' arrogant, self-inflated confidence. It's not over the top, but I like him behaving like a master of his field. Yeah, I mean, what can you say? I mean, what should I... Here it is. Maybe I should give it a little listen. We'll see how much of it we can handle this video.
There's no subject that faces up to mere ignorance than that of the subject of economics, and I've been requested numerous times before in the past to respond on a channel titled Unlearning Economics.
Today we're going to be talking about capitalism. Capitalism is something that a lot of people on BreadTube don't really seem to like.
Oh yeah, here it comes, baby. The generic 10-minute rant about how capitalism is bad that I do at the end of every video now.
Capitalism is just, it's so ingrained in us that we refuse to advance for the sake of a handful of huge wallets.
And you know what? I'm not a massive fan either. But there are few videos which really attempt to get to grips with the economics of capitalism. The best and most viewed, which as we all know are the same thing, is the two-part series by ContraPoints. As usual, Natalie's videos are entertaining and insightful. She repeatedly associates capitalism with evil reptiles who have all the money and power and aren't the Jews, to be clear. She takes us through some of the paradoxes and absurdities of contemporary capitalism, which she observes and critiques effectively, including class conflict, shitty jobs, consumerism, and inequality. I'm just watching my own video at this point. Like, cool. This is great content, guys. Come join my live streams where I just watch my own videos. And yet, somehow, the whole thing feels like less than the sum of its parts. The issue, I think, is that ultimately the videos lack a coherent theory of what capitalism is and how it works.
I can't think of anything more incoherent than a person who tries to pull capitalism outside of individualism and then tries to relabel a mixed economy as if that's a capitalist system.
In fact, we don't even get a definition of capitalism. One thing I want to acknowledge early on is that, as always, Natalie definitely knows more than she lets on in the videos. She's simplifying because she wants to make things... I'm sorry, is he just interspersing completely irrelevant comments about individualism and then a mixed economy? I'm literally just talking about defining capitalism and saying that ContraPoints didn't do a good enough job of doing that. What's his definition of capitalism, this guy? Is this what he's just what? What the fuck's he doing? He's literally just playing my video and interspersing himself talking for like 10 seconds about something irrelevant. Is accessible, and because the old white dudes who populate economics and philosophy piss her off. I also know that when Natalie says things like,
I mean, I'm not an economic theorist, and honestly, I don't really understand how the economy works.
She's at least partly joking. But whatever the reason, I think there are elements of her videos that... Did he edit it wrong? Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Sorry, let me speed this up a bit. 1.5 at least. Could be cleared up and developed. I'm going to mostly take her at her word because, you know, what else can I do?
Well, I've responded on ContraPoints before. As nice as the person is, she just doesn't have a clue what she's going on about. He's basically going to try and pull capitalism outside of individualism, like the mental gymnastics that they always do, and correlate it to that of collectivism. That's right, another word for socialism.
Okay. There's a word salad. pull capitalism outside of individualism. Now, let me ask you a question. Why would you think that I would want to do that? Right, like, why would I not acknowledge that capitalism and individualism are linked? Because historically they are. And what do I say that implies the opposite? And then turn it into collectivism, which is another word for socialism. I mean, again, no. Right, like, these are all slightly different words. You know, you can have collectively managed resources, a la Eleanor Ostrom, managed by local communities that aren't socialism. I mean, like, I literally... This is ridiculous.
I'm going to focus quite a lot on what she calls the argument.
Capitalism as we know it is a defective economic system because, although it's good at creating large amounts of wealth, it distributes that wealth in an incredibly inefficient way, where efficiency is understood not as the capacity to maximize total wealth, but as the capacity to maximize human happiness.
To start with, despite her main conclusion revolving around wealth creation and distribution, it's not clear to me from her videos how capitalism either creates wealth or distributes wealth. To answer the age-old question of how wealth is created, we will have to go back to the man many consider the founding father of economics, whose work has remained relevant for hundreds of years. That's right, the 14th century Islamic scholar Ibn Khaldun. 400 years before Adam Smith, Ibn Khaldun observed that through specialization and cooperation, human beings can produce much more than they need. But what is obtained through the cooperation of a group of human beings satisfies the need of a number many times greater than themselves. For instance, no one, by himself, can obtain the share of the wheat he needs for food. But when 6 or 10 persons, including a smith and a carpenter to make the tools, and others who are in charge of the oxen, the ploughing of the soil, the harvesting of the ripe grain, and all other agricultural activities, undertake to obtain their food, that amount will be food for a number of people many times their own.
So the problem with his argument is that food isn't just all one. Of course, back in those days, they never really had a staple diet. You've got to look at the fact that individual consumer demand is all different for one another. It's not all the same. You can't afford, when it comes to food, with regards to it having a sell-by date and all the rest of that, you can't afford to just mass produce and say, oh well, here's a certain amount for everybody, and everybody just gets the same in the same quantity, and this many times over, blah blah blah. There's enough for everyone. Expectations far exceed economic reality. In other words, scarcity. That's what defines scarcity. Being all different from one another, it's not something that when you're speaking about efficiency that you can just afford to just mass produce whatever it is. So you need to know how much of what to produce of each and every single food item. And the only way that you're going to know that is through consumer demand, dictating what prices are. Through the economic calculation problem that his type would end up causing, he would end up creating a very inefficiency that, of course, ContraPoints mentions about.
When workers...
What the hell is he talking about? Is he trying to deny that specialization and the division of labor lead to an increase in produced wealth? He's a pro-capitalist. Nothing that Ibn Khaldun says, nothing that Ibn Khaldun says is like against the force of consumer demand. Does he not realize he's arguing against a pro-market thinker? Yes, like exactly. That's just like what that has nothing. What he said has absolutely nothing to do with what I said. Do we all realise that, right? Because I wasn't denying the role of consumer demand in a capitalist economy. Specialisation and the production of more, right, can obviously it just completely is completely consistent with consumer demand, right, and producing multiple different foods. Obviously, Ibn Khaldun was speaking at a time when there were more monolithic diets, right? As far as I'm aware, than today at least, right? When the specialization was less developed. But he seems to... I don't know what he thinks I'm arguing here with this specialization point. What the hell is he talking about?
Specialize in different tasks within production units such as farms or factories. This is a source of surplus above and beyond what they need. Khaldun didn't stop there. He linked the technical division of labour to the gains from trade. If the labour of the inhabitants of a town or city is distributed in accordance with the necessities and needs of those inhabitants, a minimum of that labour will suffice. The labour available is more than is needed. Consequently, it is spent to provide the conditions and customs of luxury, and to satisfy the needs of the inhabitants of other cities. They import the things they need from people who have a surplus through exchange or purchase. Thus, the people who have a surplus get a good deal of wealth. Different production units, cities, or even countries have different specializations and trade with each other in order to attain more wealth than they could manage alone. One way of thinking about this is to call it the social division of labour, across rather than within production units. One city might specialise in food while another specialises in clothes, and by trading, they can produce more clothes and food in total than they could if they worked alone.
So I don't know where he's going with this argument, because at the end of the day, even within this mixed economy, in the presence of capitalism to some extent, you do have businesses that can mass produce, clothing, etc, etc. There's efficiency because the market's driven by prices, and prices fluctuate, and therefore businesses can react with all the variety of different products. In those days, things were much more simplistic. It's not as complex today, where you see all these hundreds of different companies, etc, and all the variety of different clothing companies and the hundreds and hundreds of different clothing items, where it's all different from one another. Every single clothing cloth item you could possibly think of in one store, never let alone every other store, you're going to have to know how much to produce of each and every single item. Now, if you were to take today's principle with his argument would collapse in on its arse. You can't just afford to just mass produce for the sake of it and then have a surplus and then just guess, since we've got a surplus, we'll just allocate it, to another country or another city or something, and therefore, through this trade, people just get what they want. Well, that isn't the case, because we saw from the Soviet Union where the central planner tried to mass produce more than 3 pairs of shoes. The reason why there was big, massive, long waiting lines is because the shoes that the central planner produced did not meet the taste of the consumer. What really determines production is down to the consumer, and that's how things should be. What is going to be produced, how much is going to be produced, through consumer demand driving production and determining what prices are. But that isn't the case with these people. They think it's just a case that you can centrally plan, and it's as if clothing is all just one. Each and every single individual consumer is all different from one another. That's the issue.
I haven't mentioned.
What the hell is he again? Okay, I'm not arguing for central planning. Obviously, consumer demand is important. It's a simultaneous system. Consumer demand, Adam Smith literally said that consumer demand advances specialization and the division of labor. You can't just randomly generate a surplus, centrally plan it. I'm so sorry that I argued to centrally plan a surplus, everybody, and just dole it out. That's clearly my argument when I'm non-committally going into the history of the division of labor and how capitalism emerged, right? And how different thinkers have thought about this and saying, this is a thing. Look at this. It's descriptive. It's not prescriptive. At no point have I argued for central planning. This is like what I would call a kind of LARPing as debunking. Just playing my video at length, by the way. If you've got an argument to make, pick the right parts, the important parts of my video, and respond to them. Don't just play the whole thing. Pause occasionally to say something completely irrelevant, insinuating that I'm a central planner, which I don't argue for in the video, and I've argued against elsewhere, if you actually knew anything about what I believe. And then say something that's completely... that you're framing as inconsistent with what I believe, but which isn't. Consumer demand is important, yes, as Adam Smith said, but I'm just detailing the division of labor, and I'm detailing cooperation and specialization and how these things can lead to a surplus. Consumer demand is a part of that as well. I'm not arguing for central planning. Next. What the fuck is he on about? I'm so confused.
Capitalism yet. Surplus and the division of labour were common to settled civilizations long before capitalism, ever since the dawn of agriculture, which was Khaldun's example. He was writing in a time and place where what we recognise as capitalism hadn't really taken root, although I have put some interesting debates over the Islamic origins of capitalism in the description.
He's talking garbage, folk. Capitalism derives from meritocracy, which dates back to the first days of barter thousands of years ago. What's he going on about? Even the ancient argument between individualism and collectivism goes all the way back to ancient Greece. So clearly he's not even got a clue about history or capitalism.
The Economist.
History or capitalism? Okay. I'm sorry, dude. How do you define capitalism, right? What I'm clearly doing is making a distinction between just having people do different tasks in a more traditional agricultural society versus like modern capitalism. And are you just saying that capitalism is eternal? If capitalism is eternal, then answer me the following question. Why is it that GDP and wealth suddenly increased during the Industrial Revolution? What happened there? Can you explain that if you just think that you project capitalism backwards throughout history? Also, it's absolutely not true that you had capitalist relations. You didn't have like the widespread prevalence of wage labor. You didn't have like the market economy, markets in land, markets in labor, markets in capital, right? You didn't have like mass production in the same way. That's the difference between capitalism and what came before. What you're doing is you're saying that maybe some idea of like trade or markets is just capitalism, which fails to make this historical distinction. What I'm trying to do is make these historical distinctions. You're just flattening all of history here. Literally ridiculous. Trade, money, and capitalism. 3 different things, right? Hunter-gatherer societies traded with each other, dude. And there are markets that just weren't capitalist in the sense that there wasn't mass production for profit. He'll never define... Yeah, and then he just starts talking about individualism. It's just like, does he just throw in as many words as he possibly can? Does he know what they mean? Ooh.
Stephen Marjolin took issue with Adam Smith's account of the division of labour, not because it was descriptively wrong, but because it missed the role of the capitalist in organisation. Like Khaldun before him, Smith tended to assume that the division of labour was arrived at for reasons of technical efficiency. People somehow realised that through specialisation, they could produce more, and this specialisation resulted in greater skills and new technologies. Marjolin points out, though, that there were many examples where the methods used in independent cottage industries were at least as productive as the methods used in early factories. For this reason, early capitalism was filled with all sorts of legal restrictions on production, which pushed workers into factories, including restrictions on how many looms could be held in a home. Rather than increasing efficiency, that is, getting more output for less input.
The reason why the mothers and children went to work in the factories, etc., was because of they viewed the factories as salvation, because they were basically starving to death. They had no food to cook with and no food on their tables, so of course they were going to view the factories as salvation. He's trying to make it sound as if these people were somehow forced into working in the factories, which just isn't the case, and somehow it was down to certain restrictions, nothing at all to do with restrictions at all. Was the British Industrial Revolution something strongly capitalist? No, it was dominated by mercantilism. Of course he doesn't tell you that.
This leads us to our definition.
Oh my god,
Capitalism is a system where production is primarily...
he literally just like lumps so much stuff in. Okay, so when Stephen Marjolin talks about restrictions, he makes a very specific historical point, which is about restrictions on how the factories were organised. Does this guy respond to it? No, he does not. And it's just like, it's just completely ridiculous. So, sorry, let me just rewind because I want to just see what he says again.
People were somehow forced into working in the factory.
Oh, sorry. He was talking about them being forced into... Okay, so he's like, they were starving. They didn't have access to food, so they went to work in the factories. Why were they starving, dude? Why were they fucking starving? Capitalism emerged as, essentially, the peasant class became less permanently tied to the land. Previously, look, peasantry... I'm no fan of peasantry, right? I'm not defending peasantry. Like, obviously, it was a hard and grueling existence, right? But they were directly tied to their means of subsistence, right? They could grow food for themselves and the feudal lord would appropriate some of it, right? Would exploit them. So it was only once that land began to be taken away. Now, sometimes forcibly, there was the enclosure movement. Does this guy mention that? No, he doesn't. But there's also, there was this just general process of land becoming marketized. And it was, you know, you could buy and sell it and lords would start to buy and sell it, right? And then you might find yourself without land, without kind of direct coercion in the sense of like, you know, forcibly evicting people from land. They might just sell it and they might find themselves with only their labor to sell, right? That is literally, this guy is not saying anything about the actual history of capitalism as understood by historians. And then he tries to make a distinction with mercantilism, right? Which is just like, what does he mean by mercantilism and what does he mean by capitalism? Yes, early capitalism was mercantilist. And there are interesting debates to be had about them. But ultimately, by my definition of capitalism, and we'll see what he says about this, this system was capitalist because you were having private production for profit, competition on the market.
Which just isn't the case, and somehow it's down to certain restrictions, nothing by mercantilists
who employ workers paid in wages and sell their produce on markets.
How convenient of them to ignore the fact that capitalism is defined around that of individualism. Of course, they always leave that out because they want...
If it's defined around individualism, what is your definition? Tell me. Come on, we're all ears, man. If you're going to keep saying individualism, what's your definition of capitalism?
To try and desperately try and correlate capitalism to what you see today with collectivism, but they can't because capitalism is antinomous to the word collect.
Oh shit, guys, he opened up a dictionary. Guys, he opened up an online dictionary. wait, let's unpack this. This looks good. This looks fucking gold. Okay, related terms for collectivism. Okay, socialism, communism, Bolshevism. Communalism, state ownership, collective ownership, Maoism. But there's, hey guys, there's also synergy and teamwork here. So maybe collectivism is good because those are generally considered good things, right? The amount of work that his like word association is doing. You see, he's just playing word association, isn't he? Well, there's individualism and that's opposite to collectivism and that's just socialism and communism and this guy's advocating communism. Understand what you mean. Formulate arguments, connect terms together using actual reasoning and evidence. Don't just throw a load of fucking words in there. This isn't Scrabble.
Collectivism. Collectivism is another word for socialism. And the reason why they leave that out is because individualism essentially defines the freedom of individuals to pursue their own economic goals and paths in the absence of government regulation. In other words, capitalism is defined around that of the market regulating itself. And the reason why they leave that out is because it was through all their socialism, through their socialist price fixing, through that of their socialist fixing of the interest rates, etc., that caused the boom and bust cycle. That's why they leave it out.
It should be...
He's literally going a mile a minute. He's basically saying things faster than his brain can comprehend them at this stage, right? So he's gone into like socialist price fixing, the interest rates, central banks. I mean, the boom bust cycle like kind of predates central banks and interest rate fixing, by the way. And, you know, can you present us with some evidence that it doesn't? Like any evidence at any point, any actual historical citation, anything that backs up your definitions and arguments would be welcome, by the way. And what did he say before? Oh yeah, so individual. So this is where he gets his dictionary definition of individualism. So hey, here's an idea, right, guys? Here's an idea. Imagine if the definition of individualism was contested and some people believed in individuals having certain liberties, political freedom, for example, without necessarily believing in the quite American-centric freedom from government regulation, right? And here's a thought. Here's a thought. What if by some definitions of individualism, capitalism conflicts with individualism? Because property rights are a restriction on freedom. If you don't own something, then you are restricted from using it. And this goes back to the Industrial Revolution. The peasants, the women and children who were hungry, who had to go and work to get into the factories, maybe they were banned by government coercion or perhaps private coercion as well from accessing the land. Pretty simple. Was that good for their individualism? I don't think so.
Of the market regulating itself. And the reason why they leave that out is because it was through all their socialism, through their socialist price fixing, through that of their socialist fixing of the interest rates, etc., that caused the boom and bust cycle. That's why they leave it out.
It should be emphasised that the rise of capitalism was accompanied by a lot of misery for the workers, as well as by the subjugation of women and by colonialism and slavery overseas. I don't want to gloss over any of this, and by the end of this video, you'll see how they can be accounted for by our analysis.
Typical socialist, a compulsive liar. And there you go, trying to correlate collectivism, which is basically imperialism and colonialism, with that of an individualist system known as...
Guys, I'm so sorry that I lied to you about the transatlantic slave trade. It was nothing to do with capitalism, even though entire books have been written making this argument. Anything bad that happens is by definition collectivism. Don't you understand that? Okay, so here's the thing. His definition of individualism is like absence of government regulation. What if slavery prospered because of the absence of government regulation? Why is that not individualism? Why is that collectivism? Apply your definitions consistently, right? But you guys get this, right? I mean, obviously you guys get this because you don't have peanuts for brains, but he's just defining everything bad as collectivism. It's like pure circular reasoning, right? It's one of those guys that gets mad at things they've made up. As an empirical fact, right, the emergence of capitalism and the emergence of slavery and colonialism and the industrial misery, they happened at the same time, right? They happened as part of like British industrial development. Now, of course, there are some very involved high-level debates. You know, what role did this play in capitalism? Was it a necessary condition, right? And notice that I don't make that argument because the truth is, unlike this guy, who I don't know what his qualifications are besides doing like a thesaurus searches, but I know that I'm not qualified to enter into those debates, right? I'm not a historian. I'm not an economic historian. But there's a big debate over how necessary was colonialism and the slave trade for the development of capitalism. Was it even detrimental? Could we have had it? You know, But let me ask you one question. Do you think this guy is going to make some kind of substantive contribution to this debate? I'll leave that as an exercise for the viewer.
Is capitalism. You see, that is the very reason why you don't bother with the whole left versus right with these people. If you want to flatten these people, you force them onto individualism versus collectivism. Folk, the evidence I've pointed out before, and I'll show it again, these people are compulsive liars.
The evidence. Oh, I just nearly knocked over my fucking bookshelf. The evidence. This is a fucking thesaurus, mate. You understand that this isn't evidence. If you write like an academic paper, you can't just like be like evidence thesaurus. I'll point to it. I've cited evidence and I've pointed to it again. You're right, comment bot. I'm so flattened. I have been flattened. I'm sorry. I've lost the plot, guys. Does this guy really think that you can just cite a thesaurus as evidence? I hope he referenced this in the description. This is a unique find. He's obviously been to the archives. He's been to the archives for this evidence, and we should really respect him as a serious scholar, because there aren't many people who can produce a Google thesaurus, which, by the way, contains terms like synergy and teamwork, which are good, which contradict his notion that collectivism is inherently bad. Hey, sometimes people working together and making group decisions can be good. Everybody knows that. Have you ever played in a football team? You've got a Rangers shirt on. Do you think... Let me ask you a question, Rangers fan. When Rangers aren't breaking the financial rules of football, and when their fans aren't, generally being unpleasant and horrible...
I'd like to talk to you about Boulder, Colorado. The person you interviewed got a few things wrong.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the donation. Yeah. Well, let's try. Okay, because I would honestly be happy. I'm happy to hear more on that. That was, oh my God. I've forgotten his name. Sorry, I was in the middle of something else there, but thank you for the donation. So, yeah. The, Jesus Christ, where the fuck was I? I need to watch my own stream back now. Before I got so rudely interrupted by a really polite fan giving me a donation. How dare you? But yeah, sorry, it was about Rangers. Yeah, do you think that the people within the Rangers team, the players, do you think they should generally behave as a collective or as individuals within a football team? Within the Rangers football team? That is a very simple question for you.
They utterly despise the fact that an antonym for collectivism is capitalism. The definition of antonym is very clear. It means a word that is opposite in meaning of another word in the same language, right? That's what an antonym means. Capitalism is the opposite in meaning to the entire meaning of collectivism. It means capitalism's got nothing to do with collectivism whatsoever. So how the fuck did he draw to the logical conclusion that both collectivist systems, imperialism and colonialism, somehow has something to do with capitalism? This is the...
Okay, so again... you can't just call bad things collectivism and use a thesaurus, which I don't even know which thesaurus it is, right? Which somehow defines capitalism as opposite to collectivism. Clearly, if you actually want to try to understand words and explore their meaning, you have to do a little bit more than go to a dictionary website. Obviously, collectivism and capitalism can be associated. Look at China. You've got like state-driven capitalism. And obviously imperialism can be related to capitalism, even if you consider that individualism. Because the search for profit, the search for raw materials especially, can lead to the invasion of countries or somehow or other the appropriation of their raw resources. This is really quite astonishing. It kind of pains me to know that people think that using a dictionary and using antonyms and synonyms is somehow an argument. Because, spoiler, an online dictionary might be quite a crude resource, right? I mean, sometimes you look up antonyms and synonyms and like there's just a lot of these websites are probably AI generated, right? Sometimes you look them up and you're like, that synonym, like that antonym or that synonym, it doesn't really work. I can see how you got there, right? But it's like there's so many on this screen that he's showing. There's like 30 on each, and it's like some of them are reaching. That is just common for looking at synonyms and antonyms. I can't believe I have to say this. Obviously, it's not a credible source. Capitalism's definitive feature is the corporation, an entity with collective ownership and therefore the ability to take on debt in a unique and new manner. Yeah, I mean, the role of laws and in structuring capitalism is well understood, right? Including contracts and like market relationships, but also limited liability.
The very reason why they are desperate to try and pull capitalism outside of individualism, because they want to try and project the blame off onto capitalism. Imperialism and colonialism are just branches of collectivism.
Whoa. Okay, so just to be clear, imperialism and colonialism are just branches of collectivism. He just has the definition of collectivism on the screen. He hasn't actually done any work to connect the two. Let's see if he does, though. I've stopped him too soon.
In other words, they're branches of socialism. State direction of the economy as a whole. Of course, they don't like that fact. It's just like how they don't like the fact that fascism is a branch of socialism, because it's all to do with collectivism. So when you're speaking about this to do with...
Wait a minute, guys. That is some seriously good reasoning. I have been refuted by facts and logic. Fascism is just a branch of socialism because it has to do with collectivism. And if it has to do with collectivism, then it's just definitely socialism. That makes so much sense, doesn't it? The Rangers football team is socialism and therefore also fascism. Don't you understand? Can't you just see it? And it's also imperialism and colonialism. But Celtic are capitalism.
The period of the subjugation of
and
women,
individualism.
Utter bullshit lie that really is, folk. One of the greatest lies that these people have ever told of the Industrial Revolution period of history. Why? For the first time in human history, when you go before the Industrial Revolution, when you go way back to the Paleolithic period, right up to the start of the Industrial Revolution, women were under the thumb of the male counterpart. That is to say, women had no freedom whatsoever. For the first time in human history, because of the factories, and they were not forced into working in them. That's another myth that they tried to spread about the Industrial Revolution. They were not forced into working in those factories. And the mothers even had the power to prevent their children working in them. The reason why they didn't is because they were going to die of starvation. The mothers, for the first time, could actually make a wage for themselves, independently. It gave them financial independence. And he tries to repaint history, spread the typical Marxist lie, and says that somehow women were subjugated. Utter bullshit. And again, when it comes down to the whole living and working conditions, a socialist critic, a socialist historian, E.P. Thompson, was forced into a concession to concede to the fact that living and working conditions had actually improved throughout the first industrial revolution between the 1790s right up to the 1840s. You actually had E.P. Thompson forced into the concession that children had always worked long before the industrial revolution, working endless hours from day until night on the farms. They don't touch upon any of that because the fact is, before the industrial revolution, their living and working conditions were actually more dangerous and were worse off than that of the earliest, poorest factories, than that of the early and the first industrial revolution. There was no collapse of living standards. That's the problem, because these people try to compare the living and working conditions back then in the 1830s, etc., and then they compare it to today's living conditions and wages, etc., etc. That's not how you measure progress. You don't look at today's living conditions and wages and look back then and say, oh, look at the conditions back then, that was so awful. Well, of course, you're looking at it from today's perspective. How about actually looking at what life was like before the industrial revolution and then looking at that period? Oh no, they don't do that. Why? Because it changes the entire narrative. And you could even look at this graph where you can see the growth of the industrial revolution. It was unprecedented. These socialists pull off this mental gymnastics to try and claim, oh, look how awful their living and working conditions were like.
Okay, so we've now got the graph of GDP, which is fine, but it's interesting that he seems to think that capitalism existed for this entire period and before, yet somehow there wasn't a massive growth in living standards before that. So capitalism was forever, but also it was only the Industrial Revolution. In addition, I mean, at least he referenced a historian. Hey, look, dude, it's not a thesaurus. It's not an online thesaurus. Congrats, you referenced E.P. Thompson. Obviously, there's a lot of debate here. But the idea that things like height fell during the early Industrial Revolution, that has some pretty concrete backing. And you look at like the condition of the working class by like Engels, that has some pretty concrete backing. In terms of the subjugation of women, of course, saying that System A leads to the subjugation of women doesn't mean that System B doesn't, right? And there will be differences in exactly how that happens. But what I was referring to was really the kind of Silva Federici argument. And again, let me just say, this is just something that I really said in passing, right? He's not really engaging with the main point of the video, but I was kind of alluding to the Silvia Federici argument where women previously, again, it's this issue of having connection to the main means of subsistence, right? So women previously had a connection to the means of subsistence. There was this campaign against witches, right? Which was very much about destroying healers, right? Sort of self-sufficient communities where the witch was like the healer, a kind of shaman or something like that, right? Where there was like productive capacity for the collective, but the small collective, which is a distinction that he doesn't seem to make between like collective states and small collectives. But yeah, just that general subjugation of women so that they would become carers. Now, of course, capitalism was the first time that women in widespread worked for wages, because it was when wage labor became widespread. But that's not the only way women can be free. And there are definitely cases, whether in the UK or across the world, where women were freer than they ended up being under early capitalism, especially. And I'm not comparing today to the previous to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Sorry, I'm obviously not doing that. Where did I do that? Tell me where I did that. No, it was about the shift to capitalism, and it was a tumultuous shift. It was a big fucking change, as this GDP graph shows, and a lot changed. And yeah, look, patriarchy is the norm throughout history. So great, go feminism. I hope we agree on that. But when capitalism began, when the Industrial Revolution began, there was this pushing out of self-sufficient production, out of peasants' production, out of the role of women as kind of carers and healers that weren't operating in the market. There was this big push away from that and into the role of women as basically just, housewives. So, I mean, it's just like, yeah. And again, there's like this, the working conditions, right, were for a lot of people really, really terrible. And it's really difficult to get into a debate about whether peasantry was better, partly because how can you have that big a debate in general when it's going to depend on the specifics? In some cases, I fully agree that in some cases, the factory probably would have been better. And there are reports of that. There are some women and men who are like, well, actually, all things considered, the factory work, I'm kind of into it. And there are people like that today, right, where they're like, I actually quite like work, even though we consider, work quite oppressive in a lot of ways, and it could definitely be improved and people are underpaid. So I'm happy to have that debate, but you're just not engaging with the way that women were subjugated, with the specific way. Right? And referencing that E.P. Thompson had to concede that there was an increase in living standards does nothing. It does nothing about this, because the increase in living standards was over the long term. And I'm not talking about that long term. I'm not talking about capitalism. I'm talking about the bit before capitalism and the transition to capitalism. This is what happens when you miss the day of school. They teach you the difference between bad, worse, and worst. Well, yeah, exactly.
Like, how was their living and working conditions like before the Industrial Revolution? Again, they don't touch upon that.
We have a solid...
I mean, I just did, so fine. But again, let me just say, he's responding really badly and poorly to a point that I just made in passing, where I knew that people watching the capitalism video were going to want this kind of Federici colonialism slavery argument, which is super important. But I was just like, wait a second, I'm just trying to define capitalism conceptually here, right? Like, what is capitalism? And then we can get back to that kind of argument. So, yeah, I mean, he just really is playing the start of my video in its entirety and saying whatever comes into his head using almost no scholarly sources. I mean, even the E.P. Thompson thing, he didn't actually go into detail on that debate, because I'd be interested to know exactly what E.P. Thompson conceded in that debate and what that debate was about, because I'm sure it doesn't match up with whatever this guy's saying. But all he keeps saying is just collectivism, socialism, fascism, they're all the same thing, imperialism, colonialism, you know.
Start on how wealth is created under capitalism.
You see, this is a lie because all you've done is shown a picture of that to do with slavery, as if to correlate that to do with capitalism. And the slavery existed for millennia, dating right back to ancient Egypt, all the way through ancient Greece and ancient Rome, all the way up to the period of 1833. So it wasn't the fault of individualism. And individualism didn't really come at...
Wait, I'm trying to understand his argument here. Is he saying, because he says slavery didn't exist, slavery did exist before capitalism, right? Slavery existed before capitalism, so it wasn't the fault of individualism. But hasn't he defined slavery out of individualism? Shouldn't he be saying, isn't it the fault, it's not the fault of slavery, right? Because slavery wasn't unique. Stop muddling up all these words, dude. If you want to make the argument that slavery is the human condition throughout history, well, chattel slavery was actually very unique, and it was industrialized, and it was quite different to the kind of relatively temporary and potted, if you like, slavery that you got throughout a lot of ancient times. Always bad, but doesn't necessarily play the same role in mass production, right? This is the argument about it. But then he just switches to individualism. Right, so this makes absolutely no sense. Stick to the word slavery. Stop throwing in as many buzzwords as you can.
around until, on the question of scale that is, when you're moving away from feudalism towards the Industrial Revolution. So there was, to some extent, a level of individualism. Again, I say it on a question of scale, because you didn't have full-blown individualism as such. You didn't really have a strong free market economy. It was strongly mercantilist, but there was, to some extent, a level of individualism to some level. What you saw was a faster real wage earning growth rate between 1820 to 1850, over and above the 0.55% real wage earning growth rate between 1780 to 1820. It's because governments had led us to wars between 1756 to 1815. In other words, all your imperialism and colonialism, that's right, your socialism, your wonderful collectivism,
Okay, so guys, war is bad. I'm gonna have to agree with him on that. He's saying slavery existed, but whenever slaves worked in the 1830s, that somehow wasn't capitalism, it was individualism. This guy is literally just rattling off the first thing that comes up in his mind and finding the first source he can find to justify, even if he does that. Slavery is me watching this video against my will. Yeah.
build society back. That's why there was a slower real wage earning growth rate in statistics. How convenient of you to completely
In statistics.
ignore that fact and try and project, just like the typical narcissist that you are, try and project the blame off elsewhere. That's all you socialists ever do. And you always love to try and repaint history all to suit your own agenda. Complete nonsense of what you're spouting. Because the reality is that what you saw was wealth creation from capitalism being created because people were free to do so. That's why there was faster growth when free trade came around in 1843. What held people back, however, was imposing an income tax in 1843 and then bombing the British people with high income tax rate in 1847, thanks to your socialist pish.
So we need to talk about the other part of
Okay, so, I mean, he's making a lot of pretty serious historical claims, right? And he just doesn't have a citation for them. I do think, again, that war is bad, but whether or not that was directly responsible for stagnating real wages, I mean, that's a really complex causal claim, right, dude? You need to provide some half-decent evidence for it. Again, was the income tax responsible for that? There's a lot of evidence that taxes don't really have a negative effect on growth. Now, it's modern-day evidence, for sure, but again, you're not presenting any evidence for your assertions. You're just dropping in, like, random factoids, really.
ContraPoint's argument.
He hasn't used a dictionary to define narcissist, so it's not true, don't worry. Well, did you know that narcissism is actually the same as collectivism, which is also fascism, and imperialism, which is contrary to individualism, which is capitalism, and therefore socialists are all liars, and they should stop trying to centrally plan the economy because it negatively affects growth, and it's just all about how narcissistic and fascist they are, and that's just what they do. They just centrally plan their narcissism and they fascistize us, and it's just horrible, socialists. Why don't you just stop? Reminder, at this stage of the video, all I've tried to do is define capitalism and discuss a little bit of its history in a non-committal sense. But he's diagnosing my personality already.
The unequal distribution of this wealth. And to do that, we need to turn to another thinker who has recently tried to make sense of capitalism. If you follow trends in economics, you may have heard of the best-selling 2014 book Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty.
Yes, that's right, Thomas Piketty. Now, of course, Thomas E. Woods Jr. and that of Robert P. Murphy touched upon that of Thomas Piketty and his work before. Again, I can leave the source for you. You can go and watch this for yourself, and you can listen to their argument. What you find from Tom.
What I like about this is that this video is clearly called Thomas Piketty Refuted, and he's called his video Capitalism Refuting Unlearning Economics. So I like to see the intellectual through lines really for this guy's inspiration, because he's quite the thinker, and I'm glad to see where he gets his inspiration from. Libertarians love the word refuted. They overuse it.
And I can leave the source for you. You can go and watch this for yourself.
Why don't you summarize its arguments yourself in a way that shows that you understand it and maybe that you can add something? Oh, he's just referenced Thomas Piketty. Oh, well, here's a response to Thomas Piketty. And everybody knows that when people make a response to something, that means that the response is necessarily correct.
You can listen to their argument. What you find from Thomas Piketty, he's not even got a clue about economics, and of course he gets his dates wrong, even on the Great Depression, so I wouldn't even take someone like him seriously. And as for the source...
Would you not? Shit, some random miserable YouTuber is... he doesn't take one of the most famous and well-respected economists in the world seriously. Shit. Also, it's quite funny. He's like, he doesn't even get his dates right for the Great Depression. It's like, look, all this guy can do is create like crappy little videos like this, right? He's never actually put work into something and created it. Capital in the 21st century, I agree it's flawed, and I go on to critique Piketty myself, right? And we'll see maybe if he engages with that. But if you've written a 600-page book, there are going to be errors. And something like an error with dates, or like a name spelled wrong, you know, getting a place wrong. This happened in Nairobi instead of Lagos. That happens. That is going to happen in a big project, in a big video, in a big book, one that you actually put effort into scripting. That is just what happens, right? So if your excuse for not engaging with Thomas Piketty is that he got the dates of the Great Depression wrong, not 100% sure if that's true, by the way, because Robert Murphy may have an idiosyncratic definition of the Great Depression. It's entirely possible, because libertarians like to do that. But I don't know. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe Thomas Piketty does get it wrong. Who the fuck cares, man? Engage with the central arguments, and this guy cannot do that. What's my central argument in my video? We are now 18 minutes in, right? What is has he summarized my central argument and responded to it?
Socialists, I think they only got to like page 20 and they cut themselves off and then pretended that somehow they knew everything. I've got to laugh at you. See, ever since you socialists took away our free market money...
You don't look like you're laughing, mate. You actually look like you're quite close to crying.
Which was gold and silver, and then you socialists imposed upon the market a fiat currency and started printing it out of thin air. How the hell did you create...
Why is imposing gold and silver as a currency not also an act of government intervention?
Wealth equality? Was it wealth equality when you started running the printing press? Meaning that the devaluation of the currency meant that people were buying less, whereas the rich are holding all the assets? Now,
okay, I mean, credit where credit's due. Did QE and other similar programs, did they increase inequality? Maybe. Has it led to asset price inflation? Maybe so. And I'm sorry that the socialists at the Federal Reserve does that. I mean, I understand that this guy has a definition of socialism that is basically, you know, all-encompassing anyone who's remotely to the left of him. But I will say that quantitative easing, I don't think that's a socialist policy, and many leftists have been quite critical of it for exactly the same reason.
of course, they invested in all that. That's not their problem. Inevitably creating a wealth gap between the rich and poor through running the printing press. And that's what...
Wealth inequality obviously predates these things, right? I mean, obviously it predates these things.
Your socialism requires. You have the audacity to even sit there and speak about wealth inequality. And I don't even concern myself over that issue. I don't even concern myself over anything. See, so...
He admits it. Did you see that? I don't even concern myself over anything. That is the most accurate thing you've said so far, buddy. I don't concern myself over anything. Amazing. That is amazing. He's literally just like he's what he's done is he's made himself very angry there, hasn't he? He's done a whoopsie. He's got very upset and he said that he doesn't concern himself with anything, when presumably he meant to say something substantive. But you know, the thesaurus can only take you so far. I don't even concern myself over everything. I don't even concern myself over nothing. You see, if you look at the thesaurus, right? You look at the thesaurus, anything is opposite to nothing. And then everything is a synonym and an antonym. And therefore it's the same as collectivism, which is also the same as fascism. And that's socialism. And I can't believe that you have the audacity to sit there and use words like anything without admitting that you're a fascist.
So long as the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting richer, who the bloody hell cares? When he goes on about this to do with the wealth inequality and stuff, I'm not interested in all of that. And he doesn't even
That's the main point of the video. How can you not be interested? Why make a response video then? I'm not, you know, this is so easy to refute that I'm just not even going to say anything. And that, I think, in itself is damning. That is damning. That I refuse to even summarize what you've said and present a counter argument. You should be embarrassed. You should be embarrassed by how much I've refuted you, by how successfully I've refuted you, because I have not had to say anything because you're so obviously wrong. How embarrassing for you. And I don't concern myself with anything. This is a good response video.
Understood what wealth is anyway. Wealth isn't to do with the wages that you earn, etc. It's to do with basically the productivity, the material possessions, what you can buy with it, etc. And when you look throughout the Industrial Revolution, due to the mass production, people, especially the poor, were far richer by the late 19th century.
Okay, so just as a first glance, he's confusing wealth and income quite clearly. The poor during the Industrial Revolution, they had income, but they didn't really have wealth, right? And again, this goes back, let's try and make this a teachable moment, because obviously this guy's a fucking moron, but like, the dispossession during the Industrial Revolution, right, was like a form of losing wealth. Now, they might not have called it wealth back then, right, but it was like you lost access to the land one way or another. There's, again, big interesting debates. Was it kind of directly forcible? Was it a more organic thing that emerged as markets emerged and market competition and selling your land became a thing, right? Who knows? You're not going to get any fucking answers from this guy. But yeah, like that dispossession was like a loss of wealth, really. In modern terms, we'd consider that a loss of wealth. But then they were earning income, but they didn't have wealth, right? And people who had wealth were the people who like owned companies, who owned land, especially in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, right? And who, you know, there's things like intellectual property as well. There's housing. I guess you could have like pension wealth as well as you get more into the present day. There's lots of different types of wealth. He doesn't seem to be defining wealth. The little wood board behind him. What life is like photography. Oh, what does it say? That would be more interesting than following his video. Should we try and figure out when he moves his head, when he gets upset again, we can see what it says.
Compared to what they were back in 1780s.
We use the life is like photography. We use the negatives to develop. That's what it says. So that's like that's I'll tell you what. That is the worst fucking sign I've ever seen, and I'm not just saying that. It's like it almost ends. We use the negatives to develop. Like work that through. Do you think he made that himself? Do you think he used a thesaurus? Life is like photography. We use the negatives to develop. I mean, he certainly uses the negatives. He seems like a very negative individual, so I guess that's the lesson he takes from that little sign. Oh, sorry, this is about capitalism.
What matters is the rich grew richer and the poor grew richer faster, and that's all I'm concerned about.
So wealth inequality did increase. Right? Actually, maybe not. Sorry, I might have made a mistake there. Wait, what did he say? What did he actually say?
All that matters is the rich grew richer and the poor grew richer faster.
So that would be income inequality actually falling, depending on the relative rates. I mean, you'd have to look at the actual data, right? Because it depends if he's talking in like percentage terms or absolute terms, right? But again, I'm not sure if this actually happened. You know, it's just, at this stage, it's just like empirical claims without evidence. So, sorry, I thought he said something different. I thought he said the rich grew richer faster. He's covering a lot of ground, you know. I'm having trouble keeping up because I'm just too stupid and narcissistic and fascistic.
And that's all I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about, making the rich equal foot on that with everybody else. I mean, this is what they are concerned about. All they look at is what the rich are earning, and that's it. Again, you can check out.
Guys, like, honestly, this is all socialists are concerned about, right? They're concerned about this, and I just want to be like, I want to be like here. I want this to be here, and I want this to be here. And my eye, I'm going to rub my eyes because my hands are flailing around, and I don't know what I'm saying.
The wealth statistics, and you can see even comparing before.
Sorry, this isn't actually a critique, but I do like how the auto captions thought that he said whale statistics, which would have made a more interesting video. All right, let's hear about this.
Equal foot on that with everybody else. I mean, this is what they are concerned about. All they look at is what the rich are earning, and that's it. Again, you can check out the wealth statistics, and you can see even comparing before that of the Industrial Revolution between 1650 to 1700, and then compare that.
Okay, whoa, we've got some actual statistics, right? Okay, but I mean, okay, where's this from? Does he have a source? Because wealth statistics, as I just said to you, right? I was talking about wealth in the past, and I was saying it's a fucking nightmare estimating this type of thing. So these types of statistics, they can be so unreliable, right? Wealth statistics even today are really confusing because like it kind of depends whether something is being actively bought and sold, whether it shows up as like financial wealth. And then so you have to like, if you're going back hundreds of years, you're inferring wealth. But like, I mean, this is statistics, right? I'll give him credit. He's showing something right. So aristocracy, population 2%, wealth ownership 80%. Before Industrial Revolution, middle class population, wealth ownership 10%. Working class population 90%, wealth ownership 10%, right? And now the aristocracy's gone way down. The wealth ownership's gone up, and the population's gone up. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Like, I don't really understand why it refutes what I said. Because, reminder that at no point did I deny that capitalism leads to a general increase in income, right? That it leads to, like, a general rise in the standard of living, especially over the long term. Why would I deny that? That's like a Marxist point. Is he actually going to explain this or tell us where it's from? It seems to be from another documentary. Let me try and hear him out because I want to see.
Even comparing before that of the Industrial Revolution between 1650 to 1700, and then compare that to 1850, and this is talking about Great Britain, you can actually see that the poor were getting richer. That's all that matters, folk.
Based on his framework, where a small number of people own wealth.
Okay, so it's actually not all that matters. And one of the points that I'm trying to make in the video is that high levels of wealth inequality, right? But just high levels of wealth among the rich and high income among the rich, it is itself a form of political power, right? So you can think about something like owning property and forcibly keeping people out, right? You can think about having more buying power in the market, so markets are more geared towards the things that richer people buy. That's especially prescient in like the prescient. Now I'm not making sense. Sorry guys, I didn't check my thesaurus today. That's especially important in the housing market, right? And you see that in like city centres in like London and stuff, where richer people are just buying up all the houses. So and then there's like lobbying and stuff, and lobbying politicians, voters reflecting the preferences of the rich. So there are reasons to care about inequality in itself. Also the fact that people often make relative comparisons, and it's been shown quite convincingly, I think, that inequality can really affect well-being and sort of status anxiety and things like that, because your income can be a pretty good metric for your worth. So there's all of these debates, and, you know, again, it's just one of these things where it's up in the air, but this guy just doesn't seem to engage with that point. Like, why would someone be concerned about inequality in itself?
Which grows faster than incomes, Piketty goes on to predict increasing inequality in the future, and is concerned about the political power that these owners...
Also, again, I have to hammer this home point, losing the ability to speak. I'm really trying to be quite descriptive and non-committal. We're still in the first half of my video. Presumably he's not going to cover it all because he doesn't care. He doesn't care, even though he made a response video, right? But it's like he's just not really treating my video as what it is, which is like a description of what's going on. What is capitalism? How did it emerge? What have its critics said? What are they focused on? They're focused on inequality, right? Piketty says this, Piketty says that. In the first half of this video, I'm very much like, let's just go through the basics. Let's just try to understand what's going on. He just doesn't seem to be grasping that. He just wants to try and refute whatever he sees. This data suggests that the middle class actually lost wealth in relative terms.
will exert as...
1 second, sorry. Oh. Yeah, well, the working class increased their wealth. Have you done the maths on that? I wasn't quick enough to work out the maths, or I couldn't be bothered, or whatever. I don't care, guys, I don't care. But yeah, that's entirely possible, actually. 8 over 10% of wealth between 8% of the population, right? Yeah, that does actually suggest that the middle class lost wealth in relative terms. So, well done, Connor. I'll give you full credit for realizing that. Comparing wealth between historical periods is a difficult thing to do qualitatively as well, which can be a critique of Piketty as well. Treating slaves as a financial asset comes to mind. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's so hard. And I need to see the sources of this data, right? You know what I mean? It's just, he just plays some random documentary. Is it maybe the Bob Murphy thing? I don't know. But it seems to be moving, and the Bob Murphy thing was a lecture, so I don't know.
Piketty goes on to predict increasing inequality in the future, and is concerned about the political power that the
Thomas J.
relative wealth increases.
I've quoted this before, and I'll show it again. This was basically Thomas J. DiLorenzo. He pointed this out in How Capitalism Saved America, and you can see that there was no dangerous concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. He's contradicted, because even in the United States between 1840 to 1900, the division of income remained the same, with 70% going to the workers, and of course the remaining 30% to that of the capital and resource suppliers. Do you realise how much that contradicts these pathological liars? And that's what they are. They're pathological liars. They'll be confronted on their lies, and then they'll try and put lies on top of lies. That's who these people are, right? The reason why that...
The word projection is thrown around a lot these days. Why doesn't he read out this quote? Don't display a big quote on the screen and then not read it out. Let me move myself so you can see. Hello. Another indictment of the trusts was that even if they weren't monopolies, they were supposedly creating a dangerous concentration of wealth in the hands of the top capitalists of the day. The conspicuous wealth of the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, Stanfords, and others seemed to support this charge. But in reality, the nation's wealth was not being concentrated in the hands of the leading capitalists. As economic historians Robert Gray and James Peterson pointed out, from 1840 to 1900, the division of all income in America remained the same. Labour received 70%, and property owners, capital and natural resource suppliers, received 30%. Okay, so obviously, that quote doesn't tell you anything about whether individual monopolists are getting richer, right? Because you had like the 1%, right, and the 99%, and then people were kind of pointing out, actually, it's like the 0.1%, right? And you can have increased concentration among the top, right? And that gives them that disproportionate power, perhaps more so than anything else that I was talking about. And also, like, this quote seems to be assuming that they weren't monopolies when they were, but I mean, that's not the point. It's not really the point I'm making.
Liars. They'll be confronted on their lies, and then they'll try and put lies on top of lies. That's who these people are, right? The reason why that contradicts them is because this was during the period of the myth of the robber barons. That's right. Period that they tried to lie about, tried to claim that they're...
Okay, so again, just to say, you can be robber barons while the total percent of income going to capital owners is staying the same. a small group of robber barons can be making out with more of it, right? I'm just saying that's possible, so the quote doesn't refute it.
There was all these monopolies, as if they say, you know, giant trust came around and it's like, oh my god, man, oh, what are we going to do? It's like the fucking sky's caving in. We're all going to fucking die. It's like all they've concentrated all the wealth into the hands of the few. What are we going to do? Instead, wealth remained the same in terms of wealth redistribution, in terms of the division of income. You know, when they go on about this danger.
So apart from him like seeming to have a fit there, the fact that wealth distribution, assuming that his statistics are right, which again, you know, I want to see more about this because this kind of stuff is a nightmare. Saying that it stayed the same isn't the same as saying it's not high. So, but think about this, right? At this point in the late 19th century, capitalism was pretty established, right? It had been around for a while. So it could be that inequality rose under early capitalism and then stayed high, right? And therefore it was still high even though it wasn't rising in that period specifically. So he's just talking about one period of capitalism, and his argument doesn't even work because the robber barons were still like individually very rich, but whatever.
Just concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. They're just spouting crap, folk, and ever since
They're just spouting crap. Average Rangers fan. This is a good screen cap for the average Rangers fan.
the days after the Industrial Revolution, what you saw was corporatism. As more and more government would interfere with that of thanks to socialism, you would see...
I'm sorry, is his definition of capitalism apart from corporations? Because here's the thing, corporations have existed for a very long time, and if you're trying to attribute that growth of wealth during the Industrial Revolution and since to capitalism, that is a time when corporations have been around, right? So then corporatism can't be entirely bad. Just be careful with your terms, man. Stop blurting stuff out. How is a corporation socialist? I mean, this is real new levels of galaxy brain, right? Corporations are literally like the definition of capitalist enterprises.
The rise of corporatism, and of course, what did the socialists do as usual? Just like the narcissists that they are, they tried to project the blame off onto capitalism. It's just classic socialist mentality.
Wait, so wasn't he arguing that they weren't... He was arguing that they weren't robber barons, right? He used that quote to argue that the monopolies weren't robber barons, but then went on to say corporatism is bad? Why is corporatism bad? Because it's socialism. Are the robber barons socialism? That's what I want to know. Do you think the robber barons are socialism? Because they seem... to me to be an example of corporatism, quite clearly, right? There's corporations.
Piketty's own data show that when slavery was abolished, there was a concomitant reduction in the wealth ratio and capital share, but nothing concrete had actually happened to capitalist stuff.
Folk, I don't know where he gets that logic from, because what you saw between 1840 right up to about 1900 was the consumer price index continuously fell, and society as a whole...
Wait, what? I talked about the wealth. So the wealth of the slave owners fell when slavery was abolished because they previously owned slaves and then didn't. What does that have to do with the consumer price index?
Was getting richer. Where on earth does he draw to that logical conclusion? There was higher levels of productivity. You know, it's just like I said, he was wrong on the Great Depression, so I'm not bloody well surprised that he would hit out with that nonsense. So I don't know what position this guy particularly sits with. I don't know whether he's a Marxist or he's supposed to mix the economy. I'm not entirely...
Then why are you making a response if you can't even fucking grasp what I mean? What? Why don't you listen? I'm not a Marxist. I'm kind of a supporter of the mixed economy, but like... that's not even the point of the video. Bear in mind, we're still at like...
I'm sure what he sits with. But obviously he's got a big problem with that of capitalism. The problem is, he's not living under a capitalist system. He's living under corporatism because you can't have a mixed economy without corporatism.
Okay, so if we're living under corporatism, again, there's this problem where they like celebrate the gains of capitalism, but then they're like, oh, well, it's corporatism when you say something bad about it. And it's just like this kind of two-step. It's like, which is it?
sector? If not, then he's going down the road of supporting this of full-blown socialism. So that means
No.
getting rid of the private sector. How then is he going to pay people wages? Running the printing press, which is just going to...
Okay, so obviously, most socialists advocate abolishing wage labour. So why would you want to pay people wages under socialism? Just running the printing press. I mean, obviously, this isn't something that I advocated in the video. He's just making stuff up.
Drive the country into hyperinflation. These people are clueless yet. He wants to make himself sound as if he's an intellectual. He calls himself pure narcissist, typical narcissist. Calls himself...
I call myself pure narcissist, typical narcissist.
An intellectual. Yeah.
Do I? I actually don't think I did call myself an intellectual. But, I mean, at least I actually use sources instead of just dictionaries and little cardboard signs about photography.
An intellectual, but doesn't even understand that you require the private sector to rationally finance the economy in order to pay people wages. If you're going to...
Okay, so again, where in my video does it suggest that I don't understand that? Like, it's kind of wrong, right? Because you do have the public sector paying people wages. But I'm just asking, where did he get this argument from? Right? Like, I don't know what he's talking about. It's nothing that I've said.
Strangle the private sector half to death. How the hell are you helping the poor? Because all you're doing by strangling the private sector half to death is driving the private sector cost through the roof. Why else do you think you saw the monopolisation, the cartels and the oligopolies? You didn't see that because of a free market. You saw it historically because of government's intervention, and you saw the private sector costs get out of control. Just look at the main American healthcare market as a prime example of what all the government intervention had created. It's a contradiction of all that rhetoric he spouts. He likes to sound intellectual about helping the poor but strangling the private sector half to death. Being an anti-capitalist is apparently helping the poor. So on one hand, they'll sit and piss and moan about corporatism and the giant corporations, but at the same time they'll sit and claim that somehow socialism is going to solve the problem.
So I mean, obviously, like government, broadly speaking, government can help the poor in a lot of ways through, for instance, investment in childcare, like industrial policy and things like that, but he's not really engaged with any of that. Sorry, so
sector half to death. Being an anti-capitalist is apparently helping the poor. So on one hand, they'll sit and piss and moan about corporatism and the giant corporations, but at the same time, they'll sit and claim that somehow socialism is going to solve the problem. Socialism is going to somehow, save you from all of that. Well, how is it? It was their socialist government interventionism that led to this very corporatist.
Okay, so obviously, there are differences between different types of government intervention. Governments can intervene on behalf of capitalists, right? Think about something like a bailout as the most obvious example. The corporate form and limited liability is another example. Intellectual property laws, perhaps another example. But also the government can intervene on behalf of the poor, of the social good, with perhaps welfare or education or healthcare or things like that. And also there are good policies and there are bad policies within all of those. Hey, sometimes stuff is difficult and complex. Part of my channel is untangling the kind of policies that work and the policies that don't. But if you just think that government is one thing, it's a monolith that's bad by definition, then you obviously aren't going to understand that, and you don't engage in any of these debates really, except to say the American healthcare system is bad because of government intervention, which is just such a massive claim. Like, obviously, the American healthcare system is a mess, and it's a combination of, like, private entities, drug companies, ripping people off with massive prices. Also, there's some government regulations that don't really work that well. And employer-linked health insurance, I don't think is a good idea. If you're not trapped in this binary of, like, it either has to be government or it's just good, right? If you're not trapped by saying like, oh, everything is due to government intervention into capitalism and otherwise markets are good, right? That if you can identify that literally every sector will have aspects of the private sector, of the public sector, nuances within those that are working and ones that aren't working. If you can't do that, then you just can't engage in these debates properly.
System. I've went on long enough, but I think that just epitomises everything. Anyway, folk, if you've got anything you would like to ask, comment in the comment section below. Be sure to like the video, share the video, and of course, thank you for watching. I shall talk to you later.
Oh, you're welcome, mate. I'm so glad I watched. So basically, as far as I can tell, so he didn't even get through. At best, he got through about half of my video, which means that he didn't respond to the main argument, right? Which was essentially that capital is defined by political power over the means of production and an ability to extract money, right? That is how I defined capital. Now, you can disagree with that definition, right? And even I, today, this was a few years ago, I might frame it differently today, you know what I mean? I'm quite happy for ideas to be developed, but it's just astonishing that he doesn't even make it there, right? And he basically just says random things, opens up a thesaurus, says that socialism, collectivism, imperialism are the same, and then that they must be the opposite of capitalism. He doesn't interrogate whether the definitions that he got from Googling for a few seconds might actually be contested by scholars within the area. There were a couple of times he referenced some economic history, but like he didn't go into anywhere near enough depth. Quite funny, right? It's weird that he chose this video as well. I feel like he could have chosen a different one. All these guys hate the government until it's time for the police to show up when their PS5 gets robbed. It's just like, this is kind of how I imagine an angry person on Twitter looking in real life. You know what I mean? But yeah, that literally responded to nothing really that I said. He just threw a load of words at me. He seemed to think I was arguing for central planning as well, which, by the way, if you knew anything about my views, you'd know I've argued against. How old is he? Did they have schools back then? He looks relatively old. It's quite sad, isn't it? He didn't watch your video, let's be real. Yeah. He just sort of played it.
There's no subject that faces up to...
I mean, his name is at least honest. Cool comment, man. Imagine. Hey, did you know? Hey, unlearning economics. You call yourself unlearning economics? Well, maybe you're unlearning economics. Bam. Roasted. Owned. Imperialism and socialism are branches of collectivism. How so? Oh, these are comments against it. I wish you were more popular. Such high quality videos unappreciated. Dude, he literally barely uses any scholarly sources, doesn't watch my video, doesn't respond to the main argument, just plays like the first half of it while completely misunderstanding it, and just thinks that he can say that everything bad is collectivism and therefore socialism and therefore fascism. Very poor reasoning. Capitalism is not flawless, but in comparison it has a better come out than socialism has. Whatever. Libertarian Scott. You know, it's interesting. I've seen this guy before. And shall I tell you what's really interesting? Dude, if you're watching, right, let's see. Your channel you joined in May 2010. So you've been around since May 2010. You've made 411 videos. They've all got really low engagement, even for your subscriber count. Right, look at these. Just so many videos. One about ContraPoints. ContraPoints doesn't understand consumer demand. Oh shit, that's where he's basically just, maybe he's just watched ContraPoint's video and he's made a response, because that's what he emphasized, right, even though it wasn't relevant to what I said. But the basic point is, dude, you've been around for ages, you're making all these really angry videos that don't use sources properly, that completely fail to understand the argument that's being made. Nobody's listening. Nobody's listening for good reason. So maybe rethink your approach? I don't know. What do I know? I'm only celebrating 200,000 subscribers. Sorry. All right, that's enough. Just kidding. Well, what wasn't that fun, everybody? I wonder how he released so many videos while researching them and writing a script. Yeah, I mean, like, it's just content for the sake of content, isn't it? It's like, and it is like, I've made a video debunking this person, therefore they must be debunked, even though I make absolutely no effort to understand their arguments, engage with their sources. Even though I actually, at the end of the video, say, or well, at some point in the video, say, I don't even care about anything. I'm not even concerned about anything. Like, what are you talking about? You're just angry. Oh God. Let's read this take on Millet. We can't watch anymore. I'm gonna die. I'm at death's door. Oh dear. That is one of the worst videos I've ever watched, and I've watched quite a lot of YouTube videos. Can you hear my American accent? You keep asking me to do an American accent, Connor. No, I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it because it's actually going to feature in the Thomas Sowell Part 2, me doing various American accents. Content for the content god. It's sad, really, isn't it? Sometimes it's nice to subject yourself to such torture. I mean, I'm fortunate in my critics, right? This is what's funny. Is like, I'm literally... I must be pretty fortunate in my critics. Because that is just dreadful. My video on free stuff probably ranks lower than that. It's quite funny, to be fair. Have you had any response from the Soulites yet? Well, not that I'm aware of, but God knows what people are going to say. The thing is, right, about the Thomas Sowell video is, I mean, look, do you remember when, well, everybody remembers when H. Bomber Guy made his video about plagiarism. Internet historian, was it? Was somebody who was plagiarizing, and his fans were, some of his fans, not, to be fair, I think a lot of them understood the problem, but there were some of Internet Historian's fans still defending him. So if you fucking, like, if people do that, if people defend people who are, like, caught red-handed plagiarizing, then people will be defending Sowell. But in my opinion, anyone intellectually honest, even if you agree with Sowell in terms of, you know, prescriptively what he advocates or some of his analysis, you cannot defend his use of sources in basic economics, especially. He misrepresents sources so badly. And his sources are weak anyway. They're like old, or they're just newspaper articles, or, you know what I mean? He doesn't cite a lot of literature reviews. He kind of cherry picks, like when he talks about the minimum wage. You can't defend him as a serious intellectual, even if you can defend better than him some of the things that he says. People will just make rants with no evidence, just like they always do. Yeah. It's really weird. I don't know. It just, I would be really embarrassed to make something like that, you know.
You didn't deserve that pain, bro.
Thank you, Ricochet. Thank you. That makes it feel slightly better. Give me more $2 donations. That makes me feel so good. Money is everything, confirmed. Yui is an individualist. Do I think copyright should be 14 years like it was originally intended? I think that would be a very good idea. I don't mind some intellectual property laws, but like they've expanded to... They're just so all-encompassing. And I think patents are... I'm more against patents than I am against copyright, especially for stuff like drugs. I don't know how someone can be so bad at something and still be well-known and popular. I don't think he is well-known and popular. Oh, do you mean Internet Historian? Sorry. UE panhandling arc, yeah. You probably gave that guy a boost in viewers. I'm fighting the temptation to watch his other stuff. I'm contemplating whether I will upload my reaction as an independent video on my live channel, because is it worth it? Am I just going to give him attention? There are actually a lot of responses to that video. It's only that all of them are yet to release, each one being 5 hours long. Yeah, I mean, the Soul video, if I were making a response to it, what I would do is probably either focus on something very specific or just be very general with a fairly short video to present like a counterpoint. I think that would be the smart way to respond to a video that long, because it's like, are you going to fucking go through it piece by piece? How long is that going to be? It could be fucking 7 hours long, right? I mean, I guess some people do that. Oh, you mean Soul? Oh, okay, yeah, Soul, yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? He kind of has a... He's definitely clear at expressing himself. He's obviously really committed to like public education, which I respect. And he has the look of somebody who's really good at what they do. I think to somebody who's not familiar with
consider yourself refuted.
shit, I've been done. For somebody who's not as familiar with like scholarly work, I think Soul does quite a good impression of somebody who's engaging with it. I mean, we're all frauds at the end of the day. Make a 10-hour long video and nothing shorter could possibly refute it. Yeah. If he had actually engaged with what you said, I could respect that. Everyone should be subject to scrutiny, even if I agree with them. But this guy just Reddit atheisted at you, literally. It was like, what was he like? He called me a narcissist at one point. A fascist? Are there any ists that he didn't throw at me? Well, capitalist, I suppose. Patents for software, agree. For software, it's like the marginal cost of software is 0. I don't believe in intellectual property for that, really. Do you think we'll get to a point in the next few decades where socialist teachings will make their way into schools? Well, I hope you know that socialism and woke, and therefore collectivism and fascism, have already taken over schools. No, but what are socialist teachings? I mean, in my school, we learned about the welfare state in a fairly sympathetic way, if kind of descriptive, you know, that there was the rise of the welfare state. And I think the implication from most of the teachers was that that was largely a good thing. I know that's not socialism, but I can't imagine a higher level of socialism being in schools, right? Because it's so complicated. These debates, right? They're serious debates. They're so fucking complicated. Like, it's so high level to start talking about, like, the emergence of capitalism and then theorizing and analyzing about it in the way that socialists do. Like, that's some proper university shit. In some ways, it's even like grad school shit, right? Theorizing. Oh dear. Dearie me. The Preston model. Hey, now we're talking. I do like a bit of community wealth building. I respect Preston for what they've done. Building up, well, the community. Building up the wealth of the community. Who would have thought? That's what it means. But yeah, like, you know, worker co-ops, investing in public institutions, using local businesses, changing transportation. I really do respect that, especially at a time of austerity. Preston's done very well. My department has actual Marxians in the faculty, so when my family complains about Marxism infecting universities, I just avoid engaging with it. Yeah. It's so funny because, like, I think, didn't somebody do the calculations, and it's like 20%, 25%, I think, of academics in America identify as Marxist, which is quite a lot. But like I said at the very beginning of this stream, right? I mean, it's not a majority. And like I said at the beginning of the stream, it's a broad church. It's like, it can mean a lot of different things. You might have a Marxist economist, or you might have like Marxologists who are more interested in studying Marx the man, right? You have a lot of people who reject the Labour theory of value who are like Marxists and Marxist economists. There's just so much going on. Do you think post-secondary schools should be funded by Private income sharing agreements. Some of that talking off for programming boot camps. Don't know about that. I mean, it seems quite restrictive if somebody has a license to a percentage of your pay for your entire life, right? Or for a very long time at least. And there's nothing you can do about it. Surely it's like progressive taxation does the job in a more progressive way. And by pooling everyone's resources instead of relying on like individual earning power, which may or may not hit the threshold. You could end up with some sort of like debt peonage type stuff with that, right? Thoughts on the deficit myth and GDP into military rising to 2.5% after refusing to fund the NHS for years? Yeah, I mean, the answer's implicit in your question, right? It's like there's no money to pay for anything except if it's the military. It's outrageous. And what really angers me is that Keir Starmer hasn't committed to changing any of this. He's just reproducing the same policies. Okay. I reckon I might call the stream here, but thanks for joining, everybody. This was fun. Maybe I'll upload the reaction as a separate thing. I don't know. I don't know. It was quite stupid, really, wasn't it? But we'll see. We'll see. But I have to go and eat because that video has rotted my brain. But anyway, I'll see you later. 200,000. See you at, 300,000 or whatever. 500,000. I need to go back to my narcissist, fascist, socialist, collectivist meeting. We're going to do some imperialism.